Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to drift away to the book of Job, suffering, patience, and restoration? Welcome to Easy Drift Sleep. Tonight we find out, one quiet detail at a time. If these stories bring you peace, a quick subscribe means we can keep making them for you. Now settle in, slow your breathing, and let your mind wander. The last embers of the day were slowly fading, painting the western sky in soft, bruised purples and deep, dusty oranges that bled into the deepening twilight, while the air, still holding the day's warmth, began to cool with the promise of night, carrying the faint, sweet scent of distant desert blossoms and the earthy aroma of sun-baked clay, as the quiet hum of evening insects began to rise from the darkening fields. A gentle chorus accompanying the slow, rhythmic breathing of the land as it settled into slumber. Far away, in a land known as Uz, a place nestled perhaps somewhere near the ancient trade routes that snaked through the arid expanses east of the Jordan River, a man named Job lived out his days, his life woven into the very fabric of that quiet, ancient world. Uz itself was a land of wide, open spaces, where the wind often whispered secrets across vast stretches of sand and rock, and the stars at night would blaze with an intensity rarely seen in more populated places, like countless tiny lamps hung in an impossibly dark, velvet curtain. Job was a man of substance, a figure of great renown in his time and place, not just for his abundant wealth, which was considerable, but even more so for the deep, unwavering integrity that seemed to emanate from his very being, a quiet strength that defined his every action and thought. He was described as blameless, a word that in that ancient tongue carried the weight of a life lived without reproach, a soul unblemished by deliberate wrongdoing, and upright, meaning his path was always straight, his moral compass true, always pointing towards what was just and honorable. He was a man who feared God, a profound reverence that shaped his understanding of the world and his place within it, and he consistently turned away from evil, not just in deed, but in thought, cultivating a purity of heart that was rare and deeply respected. Job's household was a testament to his prosperity and his diligence, a vibrant, bustling center of life and activity in the quiet land of Uz. He was blessed with 7 sons, each one a sturdy branch on his family tree, and 3 daughters, whose grace and beauty were surely a source of quiet joy to him. His children, 10 in all, formed a lively, interconnected circle, their laughter and chatter echoing through the courtyards of his spacious home, their lives intertwined in the rhythms of family and community. Beyond his immediate family, Job's wealth was measured in the living, breathing creatures that grazed on his lands and filled his corrals, a common measure of prosperity in that pastoral age. He owned 7,000 sheep, their woolly backs dotting the hillsides like scattered clouds, their gentle bleating a constant, soothing sound carried on the breeze. 3,000 camels, those magnificent, patient ships of the desert, were his to command, their slow, deliberate footsteps marking the ancient trails, carrying goods and people across vast distances. 500 yoke of oxen, their broad shoulders strong and steady, plowed his fields and pulled his carts, their deep, rumbling low a familiar sound at dawn and dusk. And 500 female donkeys, their smaller, more nimble forms useful for countless tasks around the estate, completed his vast herds. This immense livestock required a great many servants, a large retinue of men and women who tended to the animals, worked the fields, managed the household, and contributed to the smooth functioning of Job's sprawling enterprise. Indeed, the scripture tells us that Job was the greatest of all the people of the East, a title that spoke not just of his material wealth, but of his influence, his reputation, and the respect he commanded throughout the region, a man whose word carried weight, whose presence was felt, a pillar of his community. His children, as was the custom, maintained a close bond, celebrating together with a joyous regularity that spoke of their affection and camaraderie. Each son, in his turn, would host a feast in his own house, a gathering of siblings, a time for shared meals and merriment, a cycle of hospitality that revolved through the family. They would send word to their 3 sisters, inviting them to join the festivities, ensuring that no one was left out of the shared joy, a testament to the warmth and inclusivity of their family ties. These feasts were likely lively affairs, filled with the aroma of roasted meats, fresh bread, and perhaps dates and figs, accompanied by the gentle clinking of earthenware cups as they shared wine or cool water, the sounds of conversation and laughter weaving through the air, creating memories that bound them together. After each cycle of these feasts had run its course, after the last echoes of celebration had faded and the children had returned to their own homes, Job, with his characteristic piety and deep sense of responsibility, would rise early, his heart already turned towards a sacred duty. He would send for his children, gathering them together, not for another feast, but for a solemn ritual of purification. He would consecrate them, a process that in that ancient context likely involved ceremonial washing, perhaps the changing of garments, and a period of quiet reflection, preparing them for a sacred encounter. Then, with a heavy heart perhaps, and a profound sense of paternal care, he would offer burnt offerings for each of them. The number of offerings matched the number of his children, 10 in all, a meticulous devotion reflecting his earnest desire to cover every possibility. He would offer these sacrifices, burning the choicest parts of the animals on an altar, the smoke rising heavenward, a tangible representation of his prayers and supplications. For Job, in his humble wisdom, thought to himself, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This wasn't an accusation born of suspicion, but rather a deep, abiding awareness of human frailty, of the subtle ways in which even good intentions could falter, or careless words could be uttered in moments of revelry or youthful exuberance. He understood the profound gravity of offending the divine, and his love for his children, coupled with his fear of God, compelled him to intercede on their behalf, to seek atonement for any unwitting transgression they might have committed, ensuring their spiritual well-being was as carefully tended as their physical comfort. This was Job's regular practice, a consistent rhythm of spiritual vigilance woven into the fabric of his daily life, a testament to his unwavering devotion and his profound sense of responsibility as a patriarch and a man of faith. Now, it came to pass on a certain day, a day like any other perhaps, yet destined to be etched into the very fabric of time, that the angels, those celestial beings whose forms shimmered with an otherworldly light, came to present themselves before the Lord. They gathered in the divine court, a place beyond human comprehension, where the very air thrummed with sacred power and the light of God's presence shone with an intensity that would blind mortal eyes. Among them, weaving through the ranks of these heavenly messengers, came Satan himself, not as a cowering supplicant, but with a bold, almost defiant air, presenting himself also before the Lord. The word Satan in that ancient tongue simply meant adversary or accuser, and his role in this cosmic drama was to challenge, to test, to scrutinize the very foundations of faith and righteousness. The Lord, in his infinite wisdom and boundless knowledge, addressed Satan, his voice resonating with an authority that encompassed all of creation, asking, "From where have you come?" It was not a question born of ignorance, for nothing is hidden from the divine gaze, but rather an invitation, a prompting for Satan to declare his recent movements, to lay bare his observations and intentions. Satan, ever ready with a response, replied to the Lord, his voice perhaps carrying a dry, knowing inflection, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. He described his ceaseless journey across the vast expanse of the world, his watchful eyes observing every corner, every human heart, every hidden motive, ever seeking out weakness, hypocrisy, or any crack in the facade of human virtue. He was the tireless investigator, the relentless prosecutor, always on the move, always observing, always collecting evidence. He declared with a confident, almost sneering certainty, "But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, he will surely curse you to your face." He believed that if Job's prosperity, that protective hedge, were to be removed, if he were to experience genuine suffering and loss, his faith would crumble, his piety would prove to be nothing more than a fair-weather devotion, and he would turn against the very God he now praised, his true, self-serving nature revealed for all to see. It was a bold claim, a direct challenge to God's assessment of Job, and a dark prophecy of human weakness. The Lord, in his infinite wisdom, and with a quiet understanding of the profound spiritual battle that was about to unfold, responded to Satan's challenge, granting him permission to test Job, to strip away the very things that Satan believed underpinned Job's faith. "Behold, all that he has is in your power," the Lord declared, a profound concession, a temporary relinquishing of divine protection over Job's earthly possessions. However, there was a crucial, defining boundary, a limit to Satan's destructive reach, a line that could not be crossed. "Only do not put forth your hand on him," the Lord commanded, drawing a clear distinction between Job's material wealth and his physical person. His life, his body, his very being, remained sacrosanct, protected from direct harm. This limitation was critical, for it meant that Job's suffering, though immense, would not immediately end his life, allowing the full measure of his patience and faith to be revealed. And so, with this divine permission granted, Satan, the accuser, departed from the presence of the Lord, his unseen form perhaps radiating a grim satisfaction, as he set about to execute his destructive plan, heading towards the quiet, unsuspecting land of Uz, where Job lived his blameless life. It was a day like any other, or so it seemed, as Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine in the house of their oldest brother, a scene of familiar merriment and familial warmth. The sun would have been high in the sky, casting long shadows, or perhaps it was late afternoon, the golden light softening the edges of the world, as the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted from the open windows of the house, mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. The air would have been filled with the aromas of their meal, the warmth of the hearth, and the sweet scent of the wine they shared, a picture of domestic contentment and prosperity. Suddenly, and without warning, a messenger, his clothes disheveled, his face streaked with dust and sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps, burst into Job's presence, his voice hoarse with terror and exhaustion. He began to recount a tale of sudden, devastating loss, his words tumbling out in a torrent of fear and grief. The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys feeding beside them. He began, painting a picture of peaceful, productive activity, a typical day in the fields, the steady rhythm of agricultural life. But this tranquility was shattered by a brutal, unforeseen attack. The Sabaeans attacked and took them away, he cried, referring to a nomadic tribe likely from the desert regions to the south, known for their swift raids and ruthless efficiency. These raiders, skilled in desert warfare, would have swept in on their swift horses, their weapons glinting in the sun, their war cries echoing across the open fields, overwhelming the unsuspecting servants and driving off the valuable livestock. They killed the servants with the edge of the sword, the messenger continued, his voice trembling as he described the brutal slaughter, the cold, unfeeling efficiency of the raiders as they cut down those who stood in their way, leaving a trail of death and destruction. "And I alone have escaped to tell you," he finished, his eyes wide with the horror of what he had witnessed, the sole survivor sent to bear the terrible news, his very presence a testament to the savagery of the attack. Before this first messenger had even finished speaking, before Job could fully process the shock and grief of such a sudden and immense loss, another messenger, equally distraught and breathless, arrived, his face a mask of terror, his clothes torn, his body trembling. He brought news of a different kind of devastation, a force of nature unleashed with terrifying power. "The fire of God fell from heaven," he announced, his voice filled with awe and dread, describing a phenomenon that would have been interpreted as a direct act of divine judgment, a bolt of lightning or a sudden, localized conflagration of immense intensity. "And burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them," he continued, his words painting a vivid, horrifying picture of the inferno, the crackling flames consuming everything in their path, the frantic bleating of the sheep turning to silence, the cries of the servants abruptly extinguished as the fire raged, leaving behind only ash and smoke. "And I alone have escaped to tell you," he concluded, his voice barely a whisper, the sole witness to this fiery catastrophe, his survival a miracle in itself, his mind reeling from the sudden, overwhelming destruction. Even as this second messenger was still speaking, his words still hanging heavy in the air, a third messenger, his face pale with shock, his eyes wide with unspeakable horror, rushed in, his arrival punctuated by the urgency of his news. This message was perhaps the most devastating yet, striking at the very heart of Job's family, at the core of his existence. "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands," he reported, referring to another formidable, warlike people, likely from the Fertile Crescent to the east, known for their military prowess and their organized raids. These bands, strategically deployed, would have approached from different directions, encircling their target, cutting off any escape, and made a raid on the camels and took them away, he continued, describing the swift, coordinated attack on Job's vast herd of camels, those magnificent creatures now driven off into the desert, their patient forms disappearing over the horizon, stolen by the marauders. "And killed the servants with the edge of the sword," he added, the grim repetition of the phrase underscoring the brutal efficiency of the raiders, the senseless loss of life that accompanied the theft of the animals. "And I alone have escaped to tell you," he finished, his voice raw with grief and fear, his body trembling from the ordeal, the sole survivor of yet another wave of destruction, bearing news that would surely break a lesser man. Before this third messenger had even fully delivered his terrible tidings, before Job could even begin to process the cumulative weight of these successive calamities, a fourth messenger, his face streaked with tears and dust, his clothes torn, his voice choked with anguish, arrived, his presence a harbinger of the most profound sorrow. This message was the one that would strike deepest, tearing at the very fabric of Job's heart, shattering the foundation of his family. "Your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house," he began, his words painting a poignant picture of the very scene of joy and familial warmth that had been described earlier, now imbued with a terrible irony. He recounted the sudden, unexpected tragedy that had befallen them, a force of nature, yet again, but this time striking with a cruel precision. "And behold, a great wind came from across the desert," he cried, describing a sudden, powerful desert storm, a whirlwind or a violent gust of wind, perhaps a localized tornado, a force of nature both unpredictable and devastating. "And struck the four corners of the house," he continued, detailing the immense power of the wind as it tore at the very structure of the building, twisting and splintering the beams, ripping away the roof, collapsing the walls with terrifying speed and force. "And it fell on the young people, and they are dead," he finished, his voice breaking with the final, crushing blow, the simple, stark declaration of death, the tragic end to 10 young lives, all of Job's beloved children, gone in an instant, crushed beneath the debris of their own home. "And I alone have escaped to tell you," he whispered, his voice barely audible, the sole, trembling witness to the ultimate tragedy, left to carry the unbearable news to their father, a message that would change Job's life forever, plunging him into a depth of sorrow that few could ever comprehend. In that moment, as the final, devastating words hung in the air, as the full weight of his losses settled upon him, Job, with a quiet, deliberate movement, rose from his seat, his heart surely heavy with an unimaginable grief, yet his resolve unwavering. He tore his robe, a powerful, ancient gesture of profound sorrow and mourning, the rending of cloth reflecting the tearing of his spirit, the sudden, violent disruption of his world. Then, with a solemn dignity, he shaved his head, another traditional act of mourning, a stripping away of personal adornment, a symbolic laying bare of his vulnerability and his grief before God. And then, with a profound humility that spoke volumes about his character, he fell to the ground, prostrating himself in worship, his face pressed against the earth, a posture of ultimate submission and reverence. In that moment of overwhelming loss, when any other man might have raged against fate, cursed the heavens, or succumbed to despair, Job uttered words that would echo through the ages, a testament to a faith so deep, so pure, that it transcended even the most profound suffering. He spoke, his voice perhaps low and steady, filled with a quiet, aching sorrow, yet devoid of bitterness or accusation. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there," he declared, acknowledging the fundamental truth of human existence, the ephemeral nature of earthly possessions, the simple fact that we arrive in this world with nothing and depart with nothing. He understood that all he had possessed, all the wealth and comfort, was merely a temporary stewardship, a loan from the divine. Then, with a profound act of surrender and acceptance, he continued, his words a balm of faith in the face of desolation, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away." He recognized the ultimate sovereignty of God, the divine hand behind both blessing and affliction, accepting both with an equal measure of reverence. And then, with a quiet strength that defied the immense tragedy that had just befallen him, he concluded, his voice perhaps rising slightly, imbued with a quiet, unwavering conviction, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all of this, in the face of such crushing loss, in the depths of his profound grief, Job did not sin, nor did he charge God with wrongdoing. His faith remained unshaken, his integrity intact, his heart still turned towards the divine, a beacon of unwavering devotion in the midst of unimaginable sorrow, his quiet endurance a powerful testament to the purity of his spirit. It came to pass again, on another day, after the initial storm of destruction had passed and Job was left to grapple with his immense losses, that the angels once more came to present themselves before the Lord in the heavenly court, their forms shimmering with celestial light, their presence filling the divine space. And among them, just as before, came Satan, the accuser, his presence perhaps a little more confident now, his eye still keen, still searching for weakness, still ready to challenge the very foundations of righteousness. He presented himself also before the Lord, his purpose clear, his intent unwavering. The Lord, in his infinite wisdom and boundless knowledge, addressed Satan once more, his voice resonating with an authority that encompassed all of creation, asking, "From where have you come?" And Satan, ever ready with his report, replied to the Lord, his voice perhaps carrying a hint of satisfaction, a dry, knowing inflection, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it, reiterating his ceaseless vigilance, his tireless observation of humanity, his relentless search for fault and failing. Then the Lord, with a tone that might have held a subtle triumph, a quiet vindication of his servant, spoke to Satan again, saying, "Have you considered my servant Job?" The question hung in the celestial air, drawing Satan's attention back to this particular individual, this man in Uz, who had endured so much, yet whose faith had remained steadfast. The Lord then reiterated Job's unwavering character, emphasizing his continued integrity in the face of overwhelming adversity, for there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and turns away from evil. And then, with a quiet emphasis, the Lord added, "And he still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause." This was a powerful declaration, a divine affirmation of Job's steadfastness, a clear statement that despite Satan's malicious intent and the immense suffering he had inflicted, Job's core character, his unyielding faith, had remained unbroken, proving Satan's cynical predictions utterly false. Satan, however, was not one to admit defeat easily. His nature was to push further, to seek out deeper vulnerabilities, to find the breaking point he believed every human possessed. He answered the Lord with a chillingly pragmatic, almost dismissive retort, his words implying that Job's endurance was merely a matter of degree, a calculation of self-preservation. Skin for skin, he declared, a stark, ancient proverb suggesting that a man would readily sacrifice the lesser to save the greater, that he would give up his possessions, even his children, to protect his own life, his own body. He believed that Job's piety, though it had endured the loss of wealth and family, would surely crumble if his own physical well-being were threatened. Indeed, all that a man has he will give for his life, he stated, asserting his belief in the ultimate selfishness of human nature, that self-preservation was the strongest instinct, overriding all other loyalties or devotions. Satan then proposed a second, even more direct and personal test, a challenge that would strike at the very core of Job's physical existence. He declared with a confident, almost sneering certainty, "But put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, he will surely curse you to your face." He believed that if Job's own body were afflicted, if he were to experience excruciating physical pain and suffering, his faith would finally shatter, his patience would give way to bitterness, and he would turn against the very God he now praised, his true, self-serving nature revealed for all to see. It was a bold claim, a direct challenge to God's assessment of Job, and a dark prophecy of human weakness, pushing the boundaries of suffering to the absolute limit. The Lord, in his infinite wisdom, and with a quiet understanding of the profound spiritual battle that was about to unfold, responded to Satan's challenge, granting him permission to test Job's physical endurance, to afflict his body, to push him to the very brink of human suffering. "Behold, he is in your power," the Lord declared, a profound concession, a temporary relinquishing of divine protection over Job's physical person. However, there was a crucial, defining boundary, a limit to Satan's destructive reach, a line that could not be crossed. "Only spare his life," the Lord commanded, drawing a clear distinction between physical affliction and ultimate destruction. His life, his very breath, remained sacrosanct, protected from direct termination. This limitation was critical, for it meant that Job's suffering, though immense and agonizing, would not immediately end his existence, allowing the full measure of his patience, his faith, and his unwavering integrity to be revealed to all, both in the heavenly court and on earth. And so, with this divine permission granted, Satan, the accuser, departed from the presence of the Lord, his unseen form perhaps radiating a grim satisfaction, as he set about to execute his destructive plan, heading once more towards the quiet, unsuspecting land of Uz, where Job, though stripped of all he had, still held fast to his blameless life. And so, Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, a terrible affliction that would have manifested as large, festering sores, intensely painful, covering his entire body, making every movement an agony, every touch a torment. The boils would have been hot and inflamed, perhaps oozing and crusted, a constant source of discomfort and distress, robbing him of any peace, day or night. The very air around him would have been heavy with the scent of infection, a bitter, sickly smell that clung to his skin and clothes, a constant reminder of his suffering. In his agony, Job took a piece of broken pottery, a shard of clay, and used it to scrape himself, to relieve the unbearable itching and irritation that accompanied the boils, a desperate attempt to find even a moment's respite from the relentless torment. This act, crude and painful as it was the only comfort he could find, his skin raw and inflamed beneath the rough edge of the pottery. He sat among the ashes, a traditional place of mourning and deep humility, a dusty, desolate spot outside the city gates, where outcasts and those in deep grief would gather, their bodies covered in the grey remnants of fire, a stark visual representation of their brokenness and despair. The ashes would have been cool and gritty against his inflamed skin, offering a small, temporary relief from the burning, yet also coating him in a fine, suffocating dust, a symbol of his utter destitution and isolation. His wife, who had endured the loss of their 10 children and all their possessions alongside him, now saw her husband reduced to this agonizing state, his once strong and vibrant body ravaged by disease, his spirit seemingly crushed by an unending torrent of misfortune. Her own grief, having festered and grown in the quiet aftermath of their children's deaths, now erupted in a bitter outburst, her words a desperate cry born of profound sorrow and despair, her faith, unlike Job's, beginning to fray under the relentless pressure of their shared tragedy. "Do you still hold fast your integrity?" she cried out, her voice perhaps sharp with pain and frustration, unable to comprehend his continued piety in the face of such overwhelming suffering. It seemed illogical to her, almost foolish, to cling to a God who had allowed such devastation to befall them. Her words carried a desperate plea, an urge for him to abandon his seemingly fruitless devotion. "Curse God and die," she exclaimed, her voice perhaps a mix of anger and a twisted kind of compassion, suggesting that death would be a release from his unbearable torment, and that cursing God would be the only logical response to such injustice, a final act of defiance before succumbing to the inevitable. She saw no point in continuing to live in such agony, believing that a swift end, even if it meant spiritual damnation, would be preferable to prolonging his suffering. But Job, even in his excruciating pain, even in the depths of his physical and emotional torment, remained steadfast, his inner resolve unbroken, his faith a quiet, unwavering flame in the darkness. He looked at his wife, his eyes perhaps filled with a deep, aching sorrow for her own suffering, yet his voice, though perhaps weak from illness, was firm and resolute. "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks," he gently rebuked her, not with anger, but with a quiet disappointment, recognizing that her words stemmed from a place of profound grief and a lack of understanding, a perspective clouded by despair. He then articulated his unwavering conviction, his words a powerful testament to his profound understanding of God's sovereignty, both in blessing and in affliction. "Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity?" he questioned, his words a quiet challenge to her despair, a reminder that life is a tapestry woven with both joy and sorrow, and that true faith embraces both with equal acceptance. He understood that God's ways were beyond human comprehension, and that to accept only the good was to deny the fullness of divine providence. In all of this, even in the midst of his physical agony and his wife's bitter words, Job did not sin with his lips. His mouth remained pure, his words undefiled by bitterness or accusation, his spirit unbroken, his unwavering faith a quiet, powerful force that defied the immense suffering that had been heaped upon him, his patience a testament to the depth of his devotion, a beacon of endurance in the face of utter desolation. When Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, they made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. These men were not mere acquaintances, but true companions, their friendship forged over years, their bonds deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. Teman, Shu, and Nama were likely regions in the surrounding desert lands, perhaps to the south and east of Uz, places where wisdom and ancient traditions were highly valued, and where the bonds of community were strong. The journey to Job's desolate place would have been long and arduous, a testament to their loyalty and their genuine concern for their suffering friend. They would have traveled for days, perhaps on foot or by camel, across the dusty, sun-baked plains, their hearts heavy with the news of Job's calamities, their minds surely grappling with the enormity of his losses. When they lifted their eyes from a distance and saw him, they scarcely recognized him. The man they had known, the prosperous, respected patriarch, was now a shadow of his former self, his body ravaged by disease, his face gaunt and disfigured by the painful boils, his once vibrant presence now reduced to a desolate figure covered in ashes. The sight of him, so utterly transformed by suffering, was a profound shock, a visual testament to the depths of his affliction. They raised their voices and wept, their cries of grief echoing across the quiet, desolate landscape, a spontaneous outpouring of sorrow at the sight of their beloved friend. They tore their robes, just as Job had done, a powerful, ancient gesture of shared mourning, the rending of cloth reflecting the tearing of their own hearts at his plight. They sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven, another traditional act of mourning, the fine particles of earth settling on their hair and garments, a symbol of their humility and their shared sorrow before the divine. Then they sat down with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, a period of profound mourning and silent companionship, a traditional time for grieving and commiseration in that ancient culture. For an entire week, they sat in silence, their presence a quiet testament to their solidarity, their shared sorrow a heavy cloak that enveloped them all. No one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great, a suffering so immense, so overwhelming, that words seemed utterly inadequate, incapable of offering any true comfort or solace. The silence itself was a form of communication, a deep, empathetic understanding that transcended language, a shared acknowledgement of the unspeakable tragedy that had befallen their friend. The desert wind would have whispered around them, carrying the scent of dust and distant scrub. The sun would have risen and set, painting the sky in hues of gold and purple, and the stars at night would have blazed with an indifferent brilliance, as the 4 men sat in quiet vigil, their hearts heavy with grief, their minds surely grappling with the profound mystery of Job's suffering, each lost in his own thoughts, wrestling with the implications of such immense and undeserved pain. The air would have been thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of sorrow, and with the quiet, rhythmic breathing of men in deep contemplation, their eyes fixed on their friend, whose suffering was so profound that it silenced even the most eloquent of tongues, leaving only the quiet hum of the desert and the slow, steady beat of their own hearts to mark the passage of time, as the days bled into nights, and the nights into days, in that desolate place of shared grief and quiet. Contemplation, the silence a heavy blanket over their collective sorrow, waiting for the moment when words might finally break through the profound stillness, when the human need to understand, to explain, to rationalize, would finally assert itself, pushing against the boundaries of their shared, wordless despair, ready to begin the long, arduous process of seeking meaning in the midst of such overwhelming, inexplicable suffering, their thoughts turning, slowly, inevitably, towards the ancient wisdom they carried within them, the frameworks of understanding that had always guided their lives, now challenged by the stark reality of their friend's unmerited pain, a pain that seemed to defy all known explanations, all conventional wisdom, leaving them with a profound sense of unease, a deep, unsettling question mark hanging over the very nature of justice and divine providence. As the quiet vigil continued, the desert air growing cooler with the approach of another night, the stars beginning to prick through the deepening blue, their silent gaze reflecting the unspoken questions in the hearts of the grieving friends, waiting for Job to break the silence, to voice the anguish that had so profoundly altered his world, to articulate the depths of his despair, to finally give voice to the suffering that had, until now, been expressed only through his ravaged body and the quiet dignity of his presence among the ashes, as the long, slow hours continued to drift by, each one bringing with it a deeper understanding of the profound mystery that had enveloped their friend, a mystery that would soon demand to be spoken, to be wrestled with, to be debated in the quiet, reflective space they had created around him, a space of shared humanity in the face of incomprehensible loss, as the first faint stirrings of speech began to gather in the hearts of the friends, ready to emerge from the long, respectful silence, to begin the arduous journey of trying to make sense of the senseless, to offer their own interpretations, their own wisdom, to a man who had lost everything, yet still held fast to a silent, unwavering faith, a faith that would soon be tested not just by physical pain and material loss, but by the very words of those who had come to comfort him, words that would, in their own way, become another layer of his profound and inexplicable suffering, as the quiet vigil slowly, inevitably, began to draw towards its close, the unspoken questions growing louder. In the minds of the friends, ready to break the long, respectful silence with the weight of their own human understanding. The long, respectful silence, which had settled over the dust-caked ground and the suffering man like a heavy woolen blanket, began to fray at its edges, yielding to the subtle shift in the air that precedes a storm, not of wind and rain, but of words, of human attempts to grapple with the unfathomable. Eliphaz the Temanite, whose name itself whispered of the distant south, of Teman, a region known for its wisdom and its ancient traditions, was the first to stir, his gaze having lingered for what felt like an eternity upon Job's emaciated form, upon the raw, weeping sores that marred his skin, upon the vacant, pain-filled eyes that stared into some unseen distance. He was the eldest among them, perhaps, or at least the one whose bearing suggested a certain gravitas, a seasoned perspective born of many years observing the intricate dance of cause and effect in the world, and his voice, when it finally emerged from the depths of his contemplation, was measured, almost hesitant, as if testing the very air for its readiness to receive such weighty pronouncements. He cleared his throat, a dry, raspy sound that seemed to scrape against the stillness, and then, slowly, deliberately, he began to speak, his words unwinding like ancient scrolls, each one carefully chosen, each imbued with the accumulated wisdom of generations. "If someone ventures a word to you," he began, his voice a low, rumbling murmur, "will you be impatient? But who can hold back from speaking?" The question hung in the air, rhetorical yet poignant, acknowledging the immense difficulty of breaking such a profound silence, yet asserting the undeniable human need to offer counsel, to make sense of the senseless. He spoke not with accusation, not yet, but with a kind of gentle, almost paternal concern, recalling the days when Job himself had been a pillar of strength and comfort to others. "Think how you have instructed many," Eliphaz continued, his voice softening slightly, painting a picture of a past that now seemed impossibly distant, "how you have strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who stumbled, you have braced those whose knees buckled." He was reminding Job, and perhaps himself, of the man Job once was, a man of compassion and wisdom, a man who offered solace and stability in a world often fraught with uncertainty. The scent of dry earth, mingled with the faint, metallic tang of Job's wounds and the lingering smoke from the small, carefully tended fire that offered a meager warmth against the desert chill of the approaching evening, filled the air around them. The shadows were lengthening, stretching long and distorted across the ground, making the familiar landscape seem strange and unfamiliar, mirroring the disorienting nature of Job's suffering. Eliphaz's eyes, though fixed on Job, seemed to pierce through the present moment, reaching back into the shared memories of their lives, recalling the times when Job's counsel had been sought, when his presence had been a source of reassurance. He spoke of Job's past virtues, not to condemn his present state, but to highlight the stark, bewildering contrast, to underscore the very question that gnawed at the hearts of all three friends: how could such a righteous man suffer so terribly? But now trouble comes to you, and you are discouraged. Eliphaz observed, a quiet note of sorrow in his tone. It strikes you, and you are dismayed. The observation was simple, direct, yet it carried the weight of their shared bewilderment. He was articulating the very human reaction to inexplicable suffering, the sudden, bewildering collapse of one's world. He then moved to the core of his argument, to the deeply ingrained belief system that underpinned their understanding of divine justice, a framework that had been passed down through countless generations, woven into the very fabric of their nomadic existence, whispered around countless campfires under the vast, star-strewn desert sky. "Is not your fear of God your confidence?" he asked, his voice gaining a subtle firmness, "and your blameless ways your hope?" This was not a question seeking an answer, but a statement of principle, a foundational truth in their worldview, that righteousness was inherently linked to prosperity and well-being, and that suffering, conversely, was an indicator of wrongdoing, a divine consequence. The desert wind, a soft, almost imperceptible breath, rustled through the sparse, hardy scrub nearby, a sound like dry whispers, as Eliphaz continued to elaborate on this ancient understanding. "Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished?" he challenged, his gaze sweeping across the desolate scene, as if searching for an exception to this immutable rule. "Or where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it." His words were a distillation of centuries of oral tradition, of proverbs and teachings passed from elder to youth, a deeply held conviction that the universe operated on a clear, discernible moral order. The idea that an innocent person could suffer so profoundly, so completely, was an anomaly that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their understanding, to cast doubt upon the justice of the divine. He was speaking from a place of deep conviction, drawing upon what he believed to be universal truths, truths that had guided their people through the harsh realities of desert life, providing a sense of order and meaning. The sun, now a fiery orb sinking low on the horizon, cast long, purple and orange hues across the distant hills, painting the sky with a fleeting, dramatic beauty that seemed to mock the stark suffering below. The air was growing cooler, the sharp chill of the desert night beginning to creep in, making the small fire a more welcome presence, its flickering flames dancing hypnotically, casting shifting shadows on the faces of the men. Eliphaz's voice, though calm, carried the weight of this ancient wisdom, a wisdom that seemed to offer the only possible explanation for the horror before them. He then spoke of a profound, almost mystical experience, a vision that had solidified his beliefs, lending them an almost supernatural authority. "A word was secretly brought to me," he recounted, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as if sharing a sacred confidence. "My ears caught a whisper of it. In a disquieting dream in the night, when deep sleep falls on people, fear and trembling seized me and made all my bones shake." He was describing a moment of divine revelation, a terrifying encounter with the spiritual realm, a vision that had etched itself into his memory with indelible force. The image he painted was vivid, almost palpable, the profound darkness of the night, the vulnerability of sleep, the sudden, overwhelming sensation of dread, the physical tremor that shook him to his very core. "A spirit glided past my face," he continued, his eyes wide with the memory, "and the hair on my body stood on end. It stopped, but I could not tell what it was. A form stood before my eyes, and I heard a hushed voice say, 'Can a mortal be more righteous than God?' Can a human being be more pure than his Maker? If God puts no trust in his servants, if he charges his angels with error, how much more those who live in houses of clay, whose foundations are in the dust, who are crushed more easily than a moth? The words of the Spirit, as recounted by Eliphaz, were stark and uncompromising, asserting the absolute sovereignty and righteousness of God and the inherent imperfection and frailty of humanity. It was a powerful argument for humility, a reminder that no mortal could ever stand in judgment of the divine, or claim a righteousness equal to that of the Creator. The imagery of houses of clay and being crushed more easily than a moth spoke to the ephemeral nature of human existence, the fragility of life, especially in the harsh desert environment where life and death often hung by the thinnest of threads. The wind, now a little stronger, carried the faint, musky scent of desert shrubs, a smell that was both familiar and strangely comforting in its wildness. The stars, one by one, were beginning to prick through the deepening blue of the sky, distant pinpricks of light in the vast, silent expanse, mirroring the immense, unknowable scale of the universe in which their human dramas unfolded. Eliphaz's voice, though still calm, resonated with the authority of this perceived divine insight, an insight that seemed to offer a definitive answer to the question of suffering. He concluded this part of his discourse with a somber reflection on the fate of those who reject this divine order, those who, in their pride, might believe themselves exempt from the universal laws of cause and effect. Between dawn and dusk they are broken to pieces, he stated, his voice a low, mournful tone, they perish forever, unnoticed. Are not their tent cords pulled up, so that they die without wisdom? He was speaking of the swift, often unseen, destruction that could befall those who strayed from the path of righteousness, their lives ending abruptly, their very existence fading into oblivion, their wisdom, if they had any, dying with them. The image of tent cords pulled up was particularly evocative for nomadic people, signifying the sudden, complete dismantling of a home, the abrupt end of a journey, leaving nothing but empty space behind. Job, throughout Eliphaz's long, carefully articulated speech, remained largely silent, his gaze still fixed on some distant, unseen point, his body a testament to profound endurance. Perhaps he was listening, perhaps the words were merely washing over him, like the desert wind over a stone, leaving no impression. Or perhaps, in the depths of his suffering, he was already formulating his own response, a response born not of ancient wisdom or mystical visions, but of the raw, unadulterated experience of pain, of a profound injustice that defied all conventional explanations. The fire crackled softly, a steady, rhythmic sound in the encroaching darkness, its warmth a small, fragile comfort against the vast indifference of the desert night, as the first of Job's friends had finally spoken his piece, laying bare his understanding of the world, and by extension, his implicit, though perhaps unintentional, judgment of Job's plight. The air was thick with unspoken tension, with the weight of ancient beliefs confronting a raw, inexplicable reality, and the silence that followed Eliphaz's words was different from the one that preceded them, now charged with the expectation of Job's reply, a reply that would surely challenge the very foundations of their shared understanding. The stars above grew brighter, each one a tiny, distant sun, utterly indifferent to the human suffering unfolding below, as the conversation, so long delayed, had finally begun, promising to unravel the mysteries of pain and faith under the vast, watchful eye of the desert sky. Art understanding. The stars above grew brighter, each one a tiny, distant sun, utterly indifferent to the human suffering unfolding below, as the conversation, so long delayed, had finally begun, promising to unravel the mysteries of pain and faith under the vast, watchful eye of the desert sky. Job, his voice a dry whisper like sand sifting through ancient ruins, began to speak, his first words a lament that seemed to pull the very air from around them, a deep, guttural wish that the day of his birth had never dawned, that the night that announced his coming had been swallowed by an eternal darkness. He spoke of the bitter regret that he had not perished at the moment of his arrival, that he had not been carried from the womb directly to the quiet earth, where the weary find their rest and the troubled cease their stirring. The words hung in the cool desert air, each one a heavy stone dropped into a still pool, sending slow, widening ripples of sorrow across the small gathering. He painted a picture of a world where the wicked no longer vex, where the exhausted laborer finds solace, and where even the captive hears not the taskmaster's harsh shout, a place of profound silence and stillness that he yearned for with every fiber of his being. His friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, sat in attentive silence, their faces etched with a complex mixture of sympathy and a growing, almost imperceptible tension, their own thoughts beginning to coalesce into the well-worn patterns of their traditional wisdom. They had come to mourn with him, to offer comfort, but Job's raw, unfiltered anguish, his direct challenge to the very order of things, was beginning to unsettle the carefully constructed frameworks of their understanding. They were men of their time, steeped in the ancient Near Eastern traditions of divine justice, where prosperity was often seen as a direct blessing for righteousness, and suffering, conversely, as a clear sign of transgression, a divine consequence for hidden sins. This was the bedrock of their worldview, a comforting, if sometimes rigid, explanation for the unpredictable currents of life. Eliphaz, the Temanite, was the first to break the long, heavy silence that followed Job's lament. He was likely the eldest of the three, his face perhaps lined with the wisdom of many years, his eyes holding the steady gaze of one who had observed much of the world's comings and goings. Teman, his homeland, was a region known for its sages, a place from which wisdom was said to flow, and Eliphaz carried that reputation with a quiet dignity. His voice, when it came, was measured, almost gentle at first, a soft breeze rustling through dry palm fronds, seeking to soothe before it sought to correct. He began by acknowledging Job's past strength, his former role as a comforter to others, a man who had often lifted the sagging spirits of the weak and steadied the trembling knees of the faltering. He reminded Job of the hands he had strengthened, the words of encouragement he had offered to those who stumbled along life's difficult paths. But then, a subtle shift occurred in his tone, like the desert wind picking up a fine dust, a slight edge entering his voice, a hint of the underlying premise that guided his thoughts. He questioned Job's current despair, wondering why, now that trouble had touched Job himself, he was so utterly dismayed. He implied that Job's integrity, which he had so steadfastly maintained, should be his confidence, his hope, a kind of shield against such overwhelming despondency. This was the first delicate probing, the initial suggestion that perhaps Job's suffering was not entirely without cause, that the scales of justice, though invisible, were always perfectly balanced. Eliphaz then moved to a more direct assertion of the principle he held dear, that the innocent do not perish, nor are the upright cut off. He spoke of his own observations, his long years of watching the world, seeing those who plowed iniquity and sowed trouble reap the very same harvest. He described the swift destruction of the wicked, their breath extinguished by the blast of God's anger, their roar silenced, their teeth broken, much like the young lions who lack prey and scatter to the winds. This imagery, drawn from the harsh realities of desert life, would have been immediately understood by all present, painting a vivid picture of divine retribution. He recounted a chilling, almost mystical experience, a vision that had come to him in the dead of night, when deep sleep falls upon humanity, a terrifying whisper in the darkness. A spirit, he said, had passed before his face, causing the hair on his body to stand on end, a silent, formless presence that spoke in hushed tones, asking if a mortal could be more righteous than God, or a man purer than his Maker. This was the core of his argument, the unshakable foundation of his theology, that God is utterly just, utterly pure, and that any suffering, especially of this magnitude, must, by logical extension, be a consequence of some hidden flaw, some unacknowledged sin in the one who endures it. He concluded this first speech with the powerful assertion that humanity, born of dust and dwelling in houses of clay, is utterly fragile and insignificant before the divine, crushed like moths, perishing without anyone taking notice. He spoke of the folly of those who rage against their fate, urging Job to seek God, to commit his cause to the Almighty, who performs wonders beyond comprehension. He even suggested that Job's children, who had perished in the sudden collapse of their house, had perhaps sinned, and that was why they had been swept away. The words, though delivered with a certain solemnity, carried the unmistakable weight of accusation, a gentle but firm push towards Job acknowledging some fault, some transgression that would explain his current, inexplicable agony. Job listened, his eyes perhaps fixed on the flickering flames of their small fire, or perhaps gazing into the vast, indifferent darkness beyond. When Eliphaz finished, a quiet sigh escaped Job's lips, a sound laden with weariness and a deep, profound disappointment. He acknowledged that his grief was indeed heavy, his calamities weighing him down more than the very sands of the sea, which was why his words had been so rash, so full of anguish. He wished, with a desperate longing, that his request would be granted, that God would be pleased to crush him, to cut him off, to end his suffering swiftly and mercifully. He spoke of the fleeting nature of life, comparing it to a breath, a passing shadow, and expressed a profound desire for that breath to simply cease. He then turned to Eliphaz's counsel, his voice gaining a touch of bitter irony. He questioned the value of such comfort, asking if his friends truly intended to rebuke words, the desperate cries of a man who was utterly without hope, whose very existence was a burden. He asked if there was any strength left in him to endure, any end in sight to his torment. He spoke of the terror of the Almighty, the arrows of God piercing him, their poison consuming his spirit, the terrors of God arrayed against him. He challenged them, asking if a wild ass brays when it has grass, or an ox lows over its fodder, implying that his lament was not without cause, that his suffering was real and palpable, not merely a fit of unrighteous despair. He compared his friends to a deceitful brook, a wadi that swells with melted snow in the winter but then dries up in the summer heat, disappointing the thirsty caravans who had hoped to find water there. He accused them of shrinking back from his affliction, of being afraid to face the raw truth of his pain, of offering empty words instead of true compassion. He asked them what specific wrong he had committed, what sin he had hidden, that they should so readily assume his guilt. He was not asking for their wealth, he reminded them, nor for their protection from his enemies. He was simply asking for understanding, for a recognition of his profound, inexplicable suffering. He pleaded with them to teach him, to show him where he had erred, promising to be silent if they could truly demonstrate his fault. He felt their words were useless, mere wind, and that they were even prepared to cast lots for an orphan, or to barter away a friend, so little did they truly value his plight. He urged them to look at him, to see for themselves if he was lying, if his suffering was not genuine. He reaffirmed his innocence, declaring that there was no injustice on his tongue, that his palate could discern what was perverse. This was Job's steadfast defense, his unwavering assertion that, to his knowledge, he had done nothing to deserve this catastrophic turn of events. Bildad, the Shuhite, was the next to speak, his voice perhaps a little sharper, less nuanced than Eliphaz, like the dry, rustling sound of papyrus reeds in a stiff breeze. Shua was a region associated with the descendants of Abraham through Keturah, and like Teman, it was a place from which ancient wisdom was thought to emanate. Bildad's approach was more direct, more confrontational, rooted in a rigid adherence to tradition and the wisdom of the ancients. He began by questioning Job's relentless words, asking how long he would continue to speak such things, how long his mouth would utter such a mighty wind. He immediately brought God's justice into the equation, asserting that God does not pervert justice, nor does the Almighty pervert righteousness. This was a foundational belief, an absolute truth in their worldview, and to question it was to unravel the very fabric of their understanding. He then, with a chilling directness, brought up Job's children, those who had perished in the sudden, violent collapse of their house. He stated, unequivocally, that if Job's children had sinned against God, then God had delivered them into the hand of their transgression. This was a brutal blow, a direct implication of their guilt, and by extension, a suggestion that Job's own suffering was linked to their unrighteousness, or perhaps his failure to guide them properly. This was a common belief in the ancient world, where the sins of the fathers, or indeed the children, could bring calamity upon the entire household. Bildad then urged Job to seek God, to earnestly entreat the Almighty, promising that if Job was pure and upright, God would surely rouse himself on Job's behalf and restore his righteous dwelling. He painted a picture of future prosperity, suggesting that Job's former state would seem insignificant compared to the greatness of his latter days, if only he would repent and turn to God. This was the classic formula of their wisdom, suffering as a call to repentance, leading to restoration. He bolstered his argument by appealing to the wisdom of past generations, urging Job to inquire of the ancients, to consider the experience of their fathers. He spoke of the fleeting nature of human life, comparing it to a shadow, and then reiterated the ancient belief that the papyrus cannot grow without marshy ground, nor can reeds flourish without water. In the same way, he argued, those who forget God, those who are godless, will wither and perish. He described the hope of the godless as a fragile spider's web, easily broken, a house built on sand that cannot stand. He spoke of the wicked being uprooted from their dwelling, their place denying them, saying, I have never seen you. This was a powerful image of complete annihilation, of being erased from memory and existence. He concluded with the firm declaration that God does not reject a blameless man, nor does he uphold the evildoers. He promised that God would yet fill Job's mouth with laughter and his lips with shouts of joy, while those who hated him would be clothed with shame, and the tent of the wicked would be no more. Bildad's words, though perhaps intended to offer a path to hope, were steeped in the harsh judgment that Job must be guilty, that his suffering was merely the natural consequence of his unacknowledged sin. The desert night deepened around them, the air growing cooler, and the faint scent of wood smoke from their small fire mingled with the dry, earthy smell of the desert floor. Job, his body aching, his spirit bruised, responded to Bildad's rigid pronouncements with a profound weariness, a sense of being utterly misunderstood. He acknowledged the truth of Bildad's premise, that indeed God does not pervert justice, that God is mighty and righteous. But then, with a deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire ordeal, he asked a fundamental question that cut to the heart of his dilemma: how can a mortal man be righteous before God? He spoke of the impossibility of contending with God, of answering even one question out of 1,000, of the sheer overwhelming power of the Almighty. He described God as wise in heart and mighty in strength, one who moves mountains without their knowing it, who overturns them in his anger. He spoke of God shaking the earth from its place, making its pillars tremble, commanding the sun not to rise and sealing up the stars. He described God as stretching out the heavens, treading on the waves of the sea, creating the constellations of the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. These were poetic descriptions of God's vast, incomprehensible power, a power that dwarfed human understanding and human capacity. Job then returned to his central point: if God were to pass by, who could see him? If God were to snatch away, who could restrain him? He spoke of God's wrath, before which even the proud helpers stoop. How then, he asked, could he, a mere mortal, argue with God, choose his words against him? Even if he were innocent, he could not answer, but could only plead for mercy from his accuser. If he called and God answered, he still would not believe that God was listening to his voice, for God would break him with a tempest and multiply his wounds without cause. He felt that God would not allow him to recover his breath, but would overwhelm him with bitterness. If it was a matter of strength, God was mighty. If it was a matter of justice, who could summon God to court? He then articulated a profound and troubling thought, one that challenged the very neatness of his friend's theology, that God destroys both the blameless and the wicked. When a scourge sweeps through, he said, God laughs at the despair of the innocent. He spoke of the earth being given into the hand of the wicked, of judges being blindfolded, questioning if it was not God who did these things. This was Job's direct, painful observation of the world, where suffering did not always seem to align with moral deserts, where the righteous often suffered alongside the wicked, and sometimes even more intensely. He lamented the swiftness of his days, comparing them to a runner, to swift ships, to an eagle swooping on its prey, all fleeting and without hope. He spoke of trying to forget his complaint, to brighten his face, but the fear of all his suffering would not allow it. He felt that God would still hold him guilty, even if he washed himself with snow water and cleansed his hands with lye. He felt that God would plunge him into a pit, so that his own clothes would abhor him. For God was not a man, that he could answer him, or that they could come together in judgment. He longed for an arbiter, a mediator, someone to lay a hand on both of them, to bridge the infinite chasm between man and God. He wished that God's rod would be removed from him, and that God's terror would no longer frighten him, so that he could speak without fear. But as things stood, he felt utterly overwhelmed, utterly alone, with no one to stand between him and the terrifying power of the Almighty. The desert wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the fine, almost imperceptible grit of sand, a constant, gentle reminder of the vast, unforgiving landscape that surrounded them. Zophar, the Narrated, was the third friend to speak, and his words were perhaps the harshest, the most unyielding, like the sharp, cutting edge of a flint knife. Narrated was a place whose exact location is debated by scholars, but it was likely a region known for its strong, unbending traditions. Zophar was less patient, less inclined to gentle persuasion, more direct in his condemnation. He began by questioning Job's torrent of words, asking if a multitude of words should go unanswered, if a talkative man should be acquitted. He accused Job of mocking, of speaking without shame, and asserted that Job's boast of purity was an affront. He wished that God himself would speak, that God would open his lips against Job and declare the secrets of wisdom, for true wisdom has two sides. He stated, with absolute certainty, that God exacts less from Job than Job's iniquity deserves, implying that Job's suffering, though immense, was actually a mercifully reduced punishment for even greater, perhaps unknown, sins. He spoke of the unfathomable depths of God's wisdom, questioning if Job could ever fathom the reaches of the Almighty. He described God as high as heaven, deeper than Sheol, longer than the earth, broader than the sea, a being whose power was beyond human comprehension. He asserted that if God passed through, or shut up, or gathered together, who could hinder him? He knew those who were worthless, and when he saw iniquity, would he not take notice? He stated that a hollow man is without understanding, born like a wild donkey's colt, implying that Job's lack of insight into his own sin was a sign of his foolishness, his untamed nature. Zophar then urged Job to set his heart right, to stretch out his hands toward God, and to put away iniquity from his hand, allowing no injustice to dwell in his tents. He promised that if Job did this, he would lift up his face without blemish, he would be secure and would not fear. Job would forget his misery, remembering it only as waters that have passed away. His life would be brighter than the noonday, and though darkness came, it would be like the morning. He would be secure, for there would be hope. He would lie down and no one would make him afraid, and many would entreat his favor. But, Zophar warned, the eyes of the wicked would fail, they would have no escape, and their hope would be to breathe their last. This was a stark ultimatum, a clear path to restoration offered with the implicit threat of utter destruction if Job refused to acknowledge his sin and repent. The air grew colder still, the desert night pressing in, and the silence that followed Zophar's harsh pronouncements felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very stones of the desert were listening, judging. Job, his spirit now a mixture of profound sorrow and a growing, quiet indignation, responded to Zophar's words with a weary, almost mocking tone. He acknowledged their collective wisdom, or rather, their perception of it, saying, "No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you." The irony was palpable, a thin veil over his deep frustration. He then asserted that he too had understanding, that he was not inferior to them, and that who did not know such things as they had spoken. He felt that he was a laughingstock to his friends, he who called upon God and was answered, a righteous and blameless man who had become an object of scorn. He spoke of the security of robbers, the prosperity of those who provoke God, those who carry their God in their hand, a reference to idols or perhaps their own self-serving power. He then challenged their narrow view of justice, urging them to ask the animals, and they would teach them, or the birds of the air, and they would tell them, or speak to the earth, and it would teach them, or let the fish of the sea inform them. For in all these, he argued, it was clear that the hand of the Lord had done this. He spoke of God holding the life of every living thing, the breath of all mankind. He asserted that the ear tests words as the palate tastes food, implying that he was capable of discerning truth from falsehood, wisdom from empty pronouncements. He declared that with God were wisdom and might, that God had counsel and understanding. What God tore down could not be rebuilt, what God shut up could not be opened. If God withheld the waters, they dried up, if God sent them out, they overwhelmed the earth. With God were strength and insight, both deceived and deceiver were his. He led counselors away stripped, and made judges fools. He loosed the bonds of kings and bound a loincloth on their waist. He led priests away stripped and overthrew the mighty. He deprived eloquent speakers of speech and took away the discernment of the elders. He poured contempt on princes and loosened the belt of the strong. He uncovered deep things out of darkness and brought deep darkness to light. He made nations great, and he destroyed them. He enlarged nations, and he led them away. He deprived the leaders of the earth of their reason and made them wander in a trackless waste. They groped in the darkness without light, and he made them stagger like a drunken man. This was Job's expansive, almost overwhelming vision of God's absolute sovereignty, a power that was not always neatly aligned with human notions of justice or predictable cause and effect. He was not denying God's power, he was wrestling with its seemingly arbitrary application in his own life and in the world around him. Job then turned his attention directly to his friends, his voice filled with a quiet, simmering frustration. He declared that they were all physicians of no value, offering remedies that did nothing to alleviate his pain, words that were empty and unhelpful. He wished that they would simply remain silent, for that, he said, would be their wisdom. He urged them to listen to his argument, to pay attention to his pleas, and then questioned their motives, asking if they would speak wickedly for God or talk deceitfully for him. He asked if they would show partiality to God or argue for God, as one would argue for a human. He warned them that it would not go well when God examined them if they secretly showed partiality. He asked if God's majesty would not terrify them and his dread fall upon them. Their maxims, he declared, were proverbs of ashes, their defenses were defenses of clay. He pleaded with them to let him speak, and let come upon him what may. He questioned why he should take his flesh in his teeth and put his life in his hand, if not to speak his truth, to argue his case before God. Though God slay him, he said, yet would he hope in him, he would surely argue his ways to his face. This was a profound statement of faith amidst despair, an unwavering commitment to seek an answer directly from God, even if it meant his own destruction. He believed that this very boldness, this willingness to challenge God directly, would be his salvation, for no godless man would come before God. He urged them to listen carefully to his words, to let his declaration sink into their ears. He felt confident that he had prepared his case, and that he knew he would be acquitted. He then asked who could contend with him, for if anyone could, he would be silent and die. Job then made a direct appeal to God, asking for two things: that God would remove his hand from him, and that God's terror would no longer frighten him. Then, he said, he would speak, and God could answer him, or God could speak, and he would answer. He asked God to show him his transgression and his sin, to reveal why God contended with him, and why God hid his face from him, treating him as an enemy. He questioned why God would break a wind-blown leaf, or pursue dry chaff, for God wrote bitter things against him and made him inherit the iniquities of his youth. God put his feet in the stocks and watched all his paths, setting a limit for the soles of his feet. He compared himself to a rotten thing that wastes away, like a garment consumed by moths, a fragile, fading shadow of his former self. The desert wind, a constant, unseen presence, whispered through the sparse vegetation, carrying the dust of ages, as Job poured out his heart under the vast, indifferent expanse of the night sky, his voice a testament to enduring human suffering and the relentless search for meaning in the face of inexplicable pain. The stars, countless and distant, continued their slow, silent march across the heavens, utterly unaffected by the profound human drama unfolding below, as the conversation, so full of accusation and defense, continued to unfold, each word a thread in the complex tapestry of faith and doubt, woven under the watchful, unblinking eye of the ancient desert. Ancient desert, stretching out endlessly under the indifferent stars. The wind, a constant companion in that land of vast open spaces, whispered its ancient stories through the cracks in the dry mud brick walls of Job's dwelling, stirring the fine dust that had settled on everything, a thin, pervasive layer that spoke of time and neglect. Inside, the air was still heavy with the unspoken weight of Job's suffering, and the quiet, almost reverent attention of his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, who sat on the ground, their cloaks drawn tightly around them against the chill that often descended with the desert night, even after a scorching day. Their faces, etched with concern and a certain bewildered frustration, reflected the flickering light of a small oil lamp, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and shrink with each shift in the conversation, each carefully chosen word. Job, his body still racked with the agonizing boils, his voice a raspy whisper that sometimes cracked with the effort of speaking, continued to pour out the depths of his despair, his words painting a vivid, almost unbearable picture of his torment. He spoke of the relentless pain that gnawed at him day and night, a constant companion that left him no peace, no moment of respite, no quiet corner where his mind could escape the physical agony. He described the way his skin, once smooth and healthy, was now a mass of weeping sores, each one a tiny, burning ember, making every movement a fresh wave of torture, every touch of his rough sackcloth an unbearable friction. The very air, he felt, seemed to press down on him, thick with the smell of his own decaying flesh and the acrid smoke from the small, smoldering fire that offered little warmth but much discomfort, its faint glow barely pushing back the encroaching darkness. His friends listened, their expressions a complex mixture of pity and a growing unease, their minds wrestling with the profound theological questions Job's situation presented, questions that challenged the very foundations of their understanding of divine justice. They were men of their time, steeped in the ancient wisdom traditions of the Near East, where prosperity was often seen as a clear sign of divine favor, and suffering, conversely, as a direct consequence of sin. This worldview, deeply ingrained in their cultural fabric, made Job's blameless suffering an almost impossible paradox, a knot they felt compelled to untangle, to resolve, to make sense of within their established framework of belief. Eliphaz, the Temanite, the eldest and perhaps the most thoughtful of the three, spoke first, his voice measured and grave, his words carefully chosen, like pebbles laid out on a path. He began by recounting a vision, a chilling, nocturnal encounter with a spirit that had passed before his face, making the hair of his flesh stand up, a moment of profound, unsettling revelation that had left him trembling and filled with a sense of awe and dread. He described the hushed silence, the sudden, cold breath, the indistinct form that had spoken to him in a low, murmuring voice, a voice that seemed to echo from the very depths of the earth, asking a question that resonated with the core of their shared belief: can mortal man be more righteous than God? Can a man be purer than his Maker? His argument, delivered with a quiet earnestness, was rooted in the idea of divine transcendence and human frailty. He suggested that God, in his infinite wisdom and power, sees flaws even in his angels, and how much more so in mortal beings, who are fashioned from clay, dwelling in houses of dust, crushed like moths. He spoke of the ephemeral nature of human life, how quickly it passes, how easily it is extinguished, like a breath on a cold morning. Therefore, he reasoned, when suffering comes, it is not a random act, but a divine discipline, a correction, a way for God to reveal hidden faults, to purify, to bring a man back to the righteous path. He urged Job to consider his own actions, to search his heart for any unconfessed sin, any transgression, however small, that might have provoked this divine chastisement. His words, though intended to comfort and guide, carried an implicit accusation, a subtle suggestion that Job's suffering was not entirely undeserved, that somewhere, somehow, he must have strayed. Job, listening with a heavy heart, felt a fresh wave of exasperation wash over him, mingling with the bitter taste of his own physical pain. He understood the logic of Eliphaz's argument, for it was the same logic he himself had always believed, the very foundation of his own piety. But now, experiencing the inexplicable, crushing weight of his suffering, that logic felt hollow, inadequate, a cold comfort that offered no true solace. He knew in his heart that he had walked blamelessly, that he had striven to live righteously, to honor God in all his ways. The idea that his immense suffering was merely a disciplinary measure for some hidden sin felt like a cruel mockery, an injustice layered upon injustice. He responded with a raw, almost desperate plea, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes, red-rimmed and sunken, fixed on his friends. He spoke of the sheer overwhelming force of his grief, comparing it to the sand of the seas, too heavy to be weighed, its immense pressure crushing his spirit. He wished for death, for the sweet release of oblivion, for God to grant his plea and crush him, to cut him off, to let him vanish like a mist. The thought of finding peace in the dust, in the quiet darkness of the grave, seemed infinitely more appealing than the relentless agony of his present existence. He described his nights as endless stretches of torment, his bones pierced with pain, his flesh consumed by worms, his days a succession of bitter disappointment, his hope withered like a dried-up plant. He then turned his gaze to his friends, his voice tinged with a quiet, wounded reproach. He questioned their loyalty, their friendship, their understanding. He had expected compassion, a gentle hand, a word of true comfort from those he considered his closest companions. Instead, he felt they had become like deceitful brooks, like wadis in the desert that promise water but then dry up in the heat, leaving the thirsty traveler stranded and disillusioned. He reminded them of their initial silence, their 7 days of shared mourning, a period of genuine empathy that had now, he felt, given way to judgment and suspicion. He pleaded with them to look at him, to see his anguish, to understand that he spoke from a place of profound, unbearable pain, not from a desire to deceive or to stubbornly cling to some hidden sin. He yearned for a simple act of kindness, a recognition of his innocence, a moment of shared human understanding in the face of the incomprehensible. Bildad, the Shuhite, a man of more direct and perhaps less subtle temperament than Eliphaz, could not contain himself any longer. His patience, already stretched thin by Job's persistent lamentations and his refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing, finally snapped. He spoke with a sharper edge, his words more forceful, more insistent. He began by asking how long Job would continue to speak such things, how long his words would be like a mighty wind, blowing away all reason and sense. He challenged Job's implied critique of divine justice, asking, does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert righteousness? The very idea, to Bildad, was an affront, a blasphemy against the perfect, unblemished character of God. He then invoked the ancient traditions, the wisdom passed down through generations, the collective understanding of their ancestors, men who had lived long and observed much. He spoke of the natural order of things, how the papyrus grows only in the marsh, how the reeds flourish only in water, and how, when they dry up, they wither more quickly than any other plant. This, he argued, was a metaphor for the wicked, for those who forget God. Their hope, he declared, would perish, their trust would be a spider's web, easily broken, their prosperity fleeting, like a plant plucked from the sun. He pointed to Job's own children, who had perished in the sudden, catastrophic collapse of their house, suggesting that their deaths were a direct consequence of their own transgressions, and by extension, perhaps, Job's. He urged Job to seek God, to make supplication to the Almighty, to purify himself, to confess his sins, promising that if he were pure and upright, God would surely restore him to his former prosperity, making his latter days far greater than his beginning. Job listened, his heart sinking further into the mire of his despair. Bildad's words, though delivered with a conviction born of deep-seated belief, felt like a fresh wound, a harsh judgment that offered no path to understanding. The idea that his children's deaths were a punishment for their own sins, or his, was a cruel twist of the knife, adding guilt to his already unbearable grief. He knew his children, he had offered sacrifices for them regularly, out of concern for their spiritual well-being, and he believed they had lived honorably. To suggest otherwise felt like an insult to their memory, a desecration of their innocent lives. He responded to Bildad with a weary sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries of human suffering. He acknowledged the truth of Bildad's premise, that God is indeed mighty, just, and beyond human comprehension. He spoke of God's immense power, his ability to move mountains without their knowing it, to shake the earth from its place, to command the sun not to rise, to seal up the stars. He described God as the one who alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea, who makes the constellations of the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. He recognized God's unfathomable wisdom and strength, his ability to do great things beyond searching, and wonders without number. But then Job's voice took on a note of profound, existential anguish. He questioned how a mortal man, a mere speck of dust in the vastness of creation, could ever hope to contend with such a God, to argue his case, to prove his innocence. If God were to summon him to judgment, how could he possibly answer even one charge out of 1,000? If he were to wash himself with snow and cleanse his hands with lye, God would still plunge him into the pit, and his own clothes would abhor him. He felt utterly powerless, utterly insignificant in the face of such overwhelming divine majesty. He lamented the absence of an arbiter, a mediator, someone who could lay a hand on both of them, on Job and on God, to bridge the immense chasm between them, to present his case fairly. He felt trapped, caught in a cosmic legal battle where the judge was also the accuser, and there was no impartial third party to appeal to. He longed for a moment of respite, a brief pause from God's hand, so that he might speak without fear, without the crushing weight of divine power pressing down upon him. He described his life as fleeting, his days passing more swiftly than a runner, seeing no good, vanishing like boats of reed, like an eagle swooping on its prey, leaving no trace. He spoke of the terror that God inflicted upon him, not just through the boils and the loss, but through the very fear of his presence, the dread of his inscrutable will. He felt that God was crushing him without cause, multiplying his wounds without reason, allowing him no moment to catch his breath. He was weary of his life, he said, and he would give free rein to his complaint, speaking in the bitterness of his soul. He questioned why God contended with him, why he pursued him with such relentless severity, as if he were a criminal, a hardened sinner. He asked if God's eyes were like human eyes, if he saw as man sees, if his days were like the days of a mortal, or his years like human years, that he should search out his iniquity and inquire after his sin, even though God knew that he was not guilty, and that there was no one to deliver him from God's hand. He recalled his past prosperity, the days when God's candle shone upon his head, when he walked through darkness by God's light, when the Almighty was still with him, and his children were around him. He remembered the milk baths, the streams of oil, the respect he commanded in the city gate, where young men hid themselves and old men rose and stood, where princes refrained from talking and nobles held their peace. He had been a source of comfort and justice, delivering the poor who cried for help, the fatherless, and those who had no helper. He had been eyes to the blind and feet to the lame, a father to the needy, breaking the fangs of the unrighteous and snatching the prey from their teeth. He had believed he would die in his nest, multiplying his days like the phoenix, his roots spread out to the waters, and the dew lying all night on his branch. But now, all that was gone, replaced by ridicule, contempt, and agonizing pain. Zophar, the Naamathite, the youngest and perhaps the most impetuous of the three, could no longer hold his tongue. His indignation, fueled by what he perceived as Job's stubborn self-righteousness and blasphemous questioning of God, boiled over. He spoke with a fiery passion, his words sharp and unyielding, like stones flung in anger. He began by asking, should a multitude of words go unanswered? And should a talkative man be acquitted? He accused Job of uttering empty words, of scoffing at God, of thinking that his doctrine was pure and that he was clean in God's eyes. He wished that God himself would speak, that he would open his lips against Job and reveal to him the secrets of wisdom, for true wisdom has two sides. He declared that God exacts from Job less than his guilt deserves, suggesting that Job's suffering, immense as it was still a merciful understatement of the punishment he truly merited for his hidden sins. Zophar then launched into a vivid description of the fate of the wicked, drawing on traditional wisdom to bolster his argument. He spoke of the short-lived triumph of the ungodly, how their prosperity, though it may reach the heavens, is ultimately fleeting, vanishing like a dream, like smoke that is driven away by the wind. He described how the wicked man devours his wealth but then vomits it up, how the poison of vipers is within him, how he will not enjoy the rivers of oil and honey. He spoke of the terrors that would seize him, the darkness reserved for his treasures, the fire that would consume him, the heavens that would reveal his iniquity, and the earth that would rise up against him. This, Zophar asserted with unwavering conviction, was the portion of a wicked man from God, the heritage appointed to him by God. He urged Job to cast away his iniquity, to lift up his face without blemish, and then he would forget his misery, remembering it only as waters that have passed away. He promised that Job's life would be brighter than the noonday, that he would be secure, looking around and resting in safety, and many would entreat his favor. Job, by this point, felt a profound weariness settle over him, a sense of isolation that cut deeper than any physical wound. He looked at his friends, their faces earnest, their convictions unshaken, and realized that they simply could not understand. Their words, though meant to bring him to repentance and thus to restoration, felt like a barrage of accusations, each one a fresh assault on his already shattered spirit. He felt like a target for their theological pronouncements, a case study for their rigid understanding of divine justice, rather than a suffering human being in need of genuine empathy. He responded with a bitter, almost sarcastic tone, his voice thin and strained, "No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting, a stark contrast to the usual deference shown in such discussions. He then asserted that he, too, had understanding, that he was not inferior to them, and that he knew such things as well as they did. He questioned their condescension, their assumption that they held a monopoly on truth and wisdom. He lamented that he had become a laughingstock to his friends, he who had called upon God and whom God had answered, he who was righteous and blameless. He spoke of the scorn of those who are at ease, who despise misfortune, who are ready for those whose feet slip. He then shifted his gaze, not to his friends, but to the vast, unseen presence of God, his voice taking on a tone of profound, almost defiant questioning. He spoke of God's power, not just in creation, but in destruction, in the arbitrary nature of suffering. He declared that in God's hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind. He acknowledged that God alone has wisdom and might, counsel and understanding. He spoke of God's ability to break down and build up, to shut up a man and release him, to dry up waters and send them forth. He recognized God's absolute sovereignty over kings and counselors, over priests and elders, over the mighty and the weak. He described God as the one who removes the speech of eloquent speakers and takes away the discernment of the elders, who pours contempt on princes and loosens the belt of the strong. He spoke of God's ability to uncover deep things out of darkness and bring deep darkness to light, to make nations great and destroy them, to enlarge nations and lead them away. Job then returned to his central dilemma, the inexplicable nature of his suffering in the face of his blameless life. He felt that God was actively pursuing him, hunting him down like a wild beast, his arrows piercing him, his terrors arrayed against him. He described himself as a man who had been righteous, yet God had delivered him into the hands of the wicked, had made him a target for their scorn and derision. He felt that God was tearing him in his wrath, gnashing his teeth at him, his adversary sharpening his eyes against him. He described how God had broken him down, had made him a ruin, had cast him into the mire, and he had become like dust and ashes. He continued to plead with God, to cry out for justice, for an explanation, but felt that his cries went unheard, that God had turned a deaf ear to his anguish. He felt that God had become his enemy, that he was laying waste to his life, that he was tearing him limb from limb. He described his body as being wasted away, his skin shriveled, his bones burning with fever. He felt that God had delivered him to the ungodly, that he had given him into the hands of the wicked. He reiterated his innocence, his unwavering conviction that he had done nothing to deserve such a fate. He longed for a witness in heaven, an advocate on high, someone who could plead his case before God, to testify to his blamelessness. He yearned for a moment of clarity, a glimpse into the divine reasoning behind his suffering, a sign that he had not been utterly abandoned, utterly forgotten. His voice, though weak, carried the weight of a profound spiritual struggle, a wrestling with the very nature of God's justice and mercy. He was not denying God's existence or his power, but rather questioning his methods, his apparent indifference to the suffering of the innocent. He was grappling with the paradox of a benevolent God who allows such immense, seemingly arbitrary pain. His friends, however, remained rooted in their traditional understanding, unable to reconcile Job's claims of innocence with the severity of his affliction. They saw his continued self-justification as further evidence of his stubbornness, his refusal to humble himself before God and confess his hidden sins. The gulf between them widened with each exchange, each carefully crafted argument, each heartfelt lament. The air grew heavy with the tension of their unresolved debate, the scent of dry earth and distant cooking fires mingling with the faint, metallic tang of Job's wounds. The stars, countless and indifferent, continued their slow, silent rotation across the vast, dark canvas of the desert sky, their ancient light falling equally on the suffering man and his perplexed friends, on the dust-covered ground and the distant, shimmering dunes, as the profound, unyielding questions of human suffering and divine justice continued to echo in the quiet night, a persistent, haunting refrain that seemed to hang in the very fabric of the universe, waiting for an answer that remained elusive, just beyond the grasp of human understanding. Dunes, as the profound, unyielding questions of human suffering and divine justice continued to echo in the quiet night, a persistent, haunting refrain that seemed to hang in the very fabric of the universe, waiting for an answer that remained elusive, just beyond the grasp of human understanding. The days that followed blurred into a slow, agonizing procession for Job, each sunrise bringing little relief from the gnawing pain in his body and the deeper ache in his spirit. The sun, a relentless orb in the cloudless Mesopotamian sky, would climb slowly, casting long, sharp shadows from the few remaining structures that had not been utterly destroyed, its heat pressing down upon the land like a heavy cloak. Job lay amidst the ash and broken pottery, his skin a landscape of weeping sores, the once smooth texture of his flesh now a raw, inflamed surface that chafed against the rough sackcloth he wore. The air, dry and laden with the scent of dust and the faint, lingering odor of destruction, offered no comfort, only a parched dryness that seemed to seep into his very bones. He would shift occasionally, a slow, deliberate movement that sent fresh waves of pain through his body, the coarse fabric scratching at his wounds, each movement a stark reminder of his utter helplessness. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, sometimes catching in his throat as a particularly sharp pang shot through his limbs, or as a wave of nausea swept over him. The flies, persistent and bold in the desert heat, would buzz around his face, drawn to the open sores, and he would weakly wave a hand to shoo them away, the effort often leaving him more exhausted than before. The silence of the ruined compound was profound, broken only by the distant call of a scavenger bird circling high above, or the soft whisper of the wind sifting through the debris, carrying with it the fine, gritty sand that settled everywhere, coating his skin, his hair, his very breath. He would lie there, staring up at the vast, indifferent blue of the sky, sometimes for hours, his eyes unfocused, his mind a turbulent sea of grief and bewilderment. His thoughts were a tangled skein, weaving between memories of his former prosperity, the laughter of his children echoing through the courtyards, the lowing of his herds, the scent of baking bread from his kitchens, the murmur of respectful voices from those who sought his counsel, and the stark, brutal reality of his present desolation. He remembered the feel of soft linen against his skin, the taste of sweet dates and cool water, the warmth of a crackling fire on a cool desert evening, all now distant echoes from a life that seemed to belong to another man, another time. The contrast was so absolute, so devastating, that it often felt like a cruel dream from which he could not awaken, a nightmare that had become his waking reality. It was during one of these endless, sun-drenched afternoons, as the shadows began to lengthen and the heat of the day started its slow retreat, that a faint disturbance stirred on the horizon. At first, it was just a shimmering distortion in the distant heat haze, a trick of the light that Job, in his weakened state, barely registered. But gradually, as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep purple, the distortion resolved itself into three distinct figures, slowly making their way across the desolate landscape. They were still far off, their forms indistinct against the vastness of the desert, but their approach was purposeful, their pace steady. These were Job's three friends, men of considerable standing and wisdom themselves, who had heard the devastating news of his calamity from travelers and merchants passing through the region. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. Teman, Eliphaz's home, was a significant oasis town in Edom, known for its wise men and its strategic position on ancient trade routes, its people often associated with profound understanding and sagacity. Bildad, from the land of Shua, likely a region east of the Jordan, was also from a people known for their ancient traditions and proverbs. Zophar, from Nama, a place whose exact location is debated but was also likely in the broader Arabian desert region, represented another facet of the wisdom traditions of the ancient Near East. These were not casual acquaintances, but lifelong companions, men who had shared meals, counsel, and perhaps even laughter with Job over many years, their bonds forged in the shared experiences of a settled, prosperous life in a land where hospitality and kinship were paramount. They had journeyed for days, perhaps even weeks, across the harsh desert terrain, driven by a profound sense of loyalty and a deep-seated desire to offer comfort to their suffering friend. Their journey would have been arduous, traveling by camel or on foot, enduring the scorching sun by day and the chilling desert winds by night, carrying provisions of water, dried fruit, and perhaps some unleavened bread. The dust of the journey would have settled on their cloaks and turbans, their faces etched with the fatigue of travel and the heavy burden of the news they carried in their hearts. As they drew closer, the details of their appearance became clearer. Their robes, once perhaps vibrant, now dusty and faded, their faces grim and shadowed with concern. When they finally arrived at the edge of Job's ruined estate, the sight that greeted them was far more devastating than any rumor could have conveyed. The once thriving compound, a beacon of prosperity and order, was now a desolate wasteland, a testament to utter destruction. The walls were crumbled, the roofs collapsed, and the ground was strewn with the wreckage of a life utterly undone. And there, amidst the rubble and the ash, lay Job, his body a mere shadow of its former robust self, his face unrecognizable beneath the crust of sores and dirt, his eyes hollow and distant. They stopped, a little distance away, their feet sinking slightly into the soft ash. A collective gasp, or perhaps a choked sob, escaped one of them, quickly stifled. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay and dust, a stark contrast to the fragrant oils and spices that would have once permeated Job's home. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft shuffling of their feet and the distant murmur of the desert wind. They stared at Job, their hearts sinking within them, their minds struggling to reconcile the majestic, revered figure they had known with the broken, suffering man before them. They could not recognize him. The man they had come to comfort, the man whose counsel they had sought, the man whose generosity they had witnessed, was utterly transformed by his suffering. His once dignified posture was gone, replaced by a crumpled heap of sackcloth and raw flesh. His voice, once resonant and commanding, was now reduced to a faint wheeze. His face, once expressive and wise, was now a mask of pain and despair. The shock of it all was overwhelming, a visceral blow to their own senses. Overcome by the sheer magnitude of his suffering, and perhaps by a profound sense of helplessness, they reacted in a manner deeply rooted in the customs of their time and culture, a powerful, non-verbal expression of shared grief. They tore their robes, a dramatic gesture of sorrow and lamentation, the sound of rending cloth echoing softly in the desolate air. Then they sprinkled dust and ashes over their heads, letting the fine, gritty particles fall onto their hair and garments, a symbolic act of mourning, identifying themselves with Job's abject state. The dust, which covered Job's body, now covered theirs as well, a silent communion in sorrow. They then sat down on the ground beside him, not speaking a word. The sun had by now dipped below the horizon, painting the western sky in streaks of fiery red and deep violet, casting long, fading shadows across the ruined landscape. The air began to cool, a gentle breeze rustling through the debris, carrying with it the faint, earthy smell of the desert night. The stars, one by one, began to prick through the deepening blue of the sky, their ancient light falling impartially on the suffering man and his grieving friends. For 7 days and 7 nights, they sat there with Job, on the ground, amidst the ash. The silence was absolute, a heavy, palpable presence that filled the space between them. No one spoke a word. This was not a casual silence, but a deliberate, deeply respectful act of mourning, a profound acknowledgement of the depth of Job's agony. In the ancient Near East, such a period of silent lamentation was a recognized custom, a way to demonstrate solidarity and empathy in the face of overwhelming loss. To speak too soon, to offer platitudes or hasty comfort, would have been seen as an intrusion, a disrespect to the raw, unvarnished pain of the sufferer. During these long days and nights, the desert environment would have been their constant companion. The sun would rise, relentless and bright, baking the ground and intensifying the dryness in their throats. The heat would shimmer off the distant dunes, creating mirages that danced on the horizon. The air would be still, heavy, and silent, save for the occasional faint whisper of the wind. As evening approached, the sky would transform, from the brilliant blue of midday to the fiery oranges and purples of sunset, then to the deep, inky black of night, studded with countless stars that seemed to hang low and close in the clear desert air. The temperature would drop sharply, the cool night air bringing a different kind of discomfort, a chill that seeped into their bones. They would have sat, perhaps with their cloaks drawn tightly around them against the night's chill, their eyes fixed on Job or gazing out into the vast, silent expanse of the desert. The only sounds would have been the soft rustle of their garments in the breeze, the distant hoot of an owl, or the faint scuttling of some unseen desert creature. They would have shared their meager provisions in silence, perhaps a piece of dried bread, a sip of water, their hunger and thirst secondary to the profound grief that enveloped them. Their own bodies would have grown stiff and sore from sitting on the hard ground, their minds weary from the sustained vigil. Job, for his part, remained largely motionless, lost in his own world of pain and bewilderment. He would have felt their presence, a silent anchor in his turbulent sea of suffering, but the sheer weight of his physical and emotional agony would have made it difficult to engage. His eyes, often closed, would open occasionally to gaze blankly at the sky, or at the faces of his friends, his expression unreadable, a silent testament to the unimaginable depths of his despair. The sores on his body would have continued to weep, the itching and burning a constant, tormenting presence. The coarse sackcloth would have chafed and irritated, each movement a fresh reminder of his brokenness. The passage of time during these 7 days and nights would have been slow, measured only by the rising and setting of the sun and the moon. Each dawn would bring a fresh wave of despair, each dusk a deepening of the gloom. The air would carry the faint, metallic scent of his wounds, mixed with the dry, dusty smell of the desert. The taste in his mouth would be bitter, a reflection of the bitterness in his soul. He would have heard the soft sounds of his friends' breathing, the occasional shift of their weight, their very presence a silent question mark in the vast, echoing space of his suffering. This prolonged silence was a powerful act of empathy, a recognition that some griefs are too profound for words, too vast to be contained by human language. It was a testament to the depth of their friendship, a willingness to simply be with Job in his suffering, to share in his desolation without attempting to fix it or explain it. They understood, in those initial days, that Job's pain was beyond the reach of conventional comfort, that what he needed most was a silent, steadfast presence. As the 7th day drew to a close, and the last sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a brief, ethereal glow before plunging it into darkness, a subtle shift began to occur. The weight of the silence, which had initially been a comfort, began to press in, becoming almost unbearable. The unspoken questions, the unexpressed emotions, began to accumulate, a heavy burden in the air. The friends, having exhausted the silent ritual of mourning, perhaps felt an increasing urge to understand, to make sense of the incomprehensible. And Job, after days of silent endurance, perhaps found the silence itself becoming a torment, a void that mirrored the emptiness in his own life. It was then, as the first stars began to appear in the velvet blackness of the desert sky, that Job finally broke the silence, his voice a raw, ragged whisper, barely audible above the gentle sigh of the wind. His words, when they came, were not a plea for comfort, nor a question directed at his friends, but a profound, heart-wrenching lament, a cry from the deepest depths of his suffering soul. He cursed the day he was born, wishing he had never seen the light of day, wishing he had been stillborn, or had perished at birth. His voice, hoarse and weak, carried the weight of unimaginable sorrow, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the quiet night. He spoke of the bitterness of life, of the futility of existence when it is filled with such relentless pain. He wished for the peace of the grave, for the deep, undisturbed sleep of death, where the wicked cease from troubling and the weary are at rest. He longed for the darkness, for the quiet oblivion that would free him from the torment of his body and the anguish of his spirit. His words were not a rejection of God, not yet, but a desperate yearning for an end to his suffering, a profound expression of his utter exhaustion and despair. The air grew heavy with his lament, each word a slow, painful exhalation of his shattered hope. He described the longing for death as a hidden treasure, a welcome release, a sweet oblivion. He asked why light was given to him, a man whose way was hidden, whom God had hedged in. His sleep had fled, replaced by groaning, his food tasted like ashes, and his roaring poured out like water. The very things he feared had come upon him, the very things he dreaded had befallen him. He had no peace, no quietness, no rest, only trouble. The words hung in the cool night air, each syllable a testament to his profound distress, a raw, unfiltered outpouring of a soul in torment. His friends listened in silence, their faces etched with a mixture of grief, shock, and perhaps a dawning unease. This was not the Job they knew, the patient, righteous man who had always found solace in faith. This was a man utterly consumed by his pain, teetering on the edge of utter despair. The depth of his lament was unsettling, challenging their preconceived notions of suffering and divine justice. The desert night, which had offered a quiet backdrop to their silent vigil, now seemed to amplify Job's desperate cries, carrying them on the soft breeze, making them resonate in the vast, empty spaces around them. As Job's voice faded, leaving behind a lingering echo of his anguish, the silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer a silence of shared mourning, but one charged with unspoken questions, with the heavy weight of theological debate beginning to stir. The friends, wise men though they were, found themselves in uncharted territory. Their traditional understanding of the world, where righteousness led to prosperity and suffering was a consequence of sin, was being profoundly challenged by the sight and sound of Job's innocent agony. It was Eliphaz, the Temanite, the eldest and perhaps the most measured of the three, who finally broke the renewed silence. His voice, when it came, was soft, almost hesitant at first, as if testing the air, weighing his words carefully. He began by acknowledging Job's suffering, his words imbued with a certain gentleness, a recognition of the profound pain that had just been articulated. But beneath the initial sympathy, there was a subtle shift, a faint tremor of the conventional wisdom that would soon dominate their discourse. He spoke of Job's past strength, his ability to comfort others, to strengthen the weak, to uphold those who stumbled. He reminded Job of his own teachings, of his own faith. If we essay to commune with thee, wilt thou be grieved? Eliphaz began, his voice a low, steady murmur against the vastness of the desert night. But who can withhold himself from speaking? His words were carefully chosen, a gentle preamble to the difficult truths he believed he had to impart. He spoke of Job's past wisdom, his strength in comforting others, his ability to lift up the fallen. Behold, thou hast instructed many, and thou hast strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him that was falling, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. He paused, allowing his words to settle in the cool night air, the subtle implication hanging unspoken. Why then, Job, can you not apply this same strength and wisdom to yourself? He then moved to the core of his argument, rooted deeply in the ancient wisdom traditions of the Near East, a belief system that held a strong correlation between actions and consequences. He spoke of the fundamental principle of justice, of the idea that the righteous do not perish, and that those who sow iniquity reap trouble. Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished, being innocent? Or where were the righteous cut off? Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity, and sow wickedness, reap the same. His voice was calm, almost pedagogical, as if reciting a well-known truth, a fundamental law of the universe that, in his mind, could not be gainsaid. Eliphaz continued, his voice gaining a quiet conviction, describing how those who commit evil are destroyed by the breath of God, by the blast of his anger. He spoke of the roaring of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, and the teeth of the young lions being broken, a vivid metaphor for the destruction of the wicked and their offspring. He painted a picture of divine retribution, of God's absolute power and justice, a justice that, in his view, was always perfectly administered, always perfectly aligned with the deeds of men. He then recounted a personal experience, a vision, a spiritual encounter that had deeply shaped his understanding of divine truth. He described a spirit passing before his face, making the hair of his flesh stand up, a chilling or inspiring moment. He spoke of a voice, a whisper, asking a profound question in the stillness of the night: shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his Maker? The question hung in the air, rhetorical and powerful, intended to humble and to remind of the vast chasm between human imperfection and divine perfection. This vision, Eliphaz believed, revealed a fundamental truth: God trusts not even in his angels, and he charges his servants with folly. How much less, then, can mortal man, dwelling in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, be considered pure or righteous before him? He spoke of man being crushed before the moth, perishing forever without anyone regarding it. The message was clear, though delivered with a certain solemnity. Job, like all men, is inherently flawed, and his suffering must, therefore, be a consequence of some hidden sin, some transgression, however subtle, that had incurred God's righteous wrath. He spoke of the foolish being killed by their own wrath, and the simple dying through envy, their habitations cursed. He described seeing the foolish taking root, but then their habitation being suddenly cursed. He spoke of their children being far from safety, crushed in the gate, with none to deliver them. The harvest of the wicked, he asserted, is eaten by the hungry, taken by the thirsty, and swallowed up by the robber. He was laying out, with quiet conviction, the traditional understanding of cause and effect of a divinely ordered universe where justice, though sometimes mysterious, was always ultimately served. His words, though spoken with a measured tone, carried the undeniable implication that Job's suffering was not arbitrary, but a direct result of his own actions, however unconscious or forgotten they might be. He was gently, yet firmly, suggesting that Job needed to examine his conscience to find the hidden sin that had brought about such catastrophic consequences. The desert wind continued its soft murmur, carrying Eliphaz's words into the vast, silent night, where they mingled with the faint scent of dust and the distant cries of unseen creatures, a quiet challenge to Job's profound lament, a subtle shifting of the burden of explanation onto the shoulders of the suffering man himself. The stars above, countless and indifferent, continued their slow, majestic dance across the heavens, their ancient light illuminating the scene below, where human wisdom and human suffering now stood in stark, unspoken confrontation, poised on the brink of a long and arduous debate that would unfold over many more days and nights, under the watchful gaze of the silent desert, as the profound questions of justice and suffering continued to swirl, unyielding, in the cool night air, waiting for a response from Job, a response that would soon come, a deep, weary sigh before the next wave of argument, a quiet, almost imperceptible tremor in the vast, silent expanse of the desert. A quiet, almost imperceptible tremor in the vast, silent expanse of the desert. Job, his voice a low, raspy murmur, like dry leaves skittering across sun-baked earth, finally broke the heavy silence that had settled over them, a silence thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of his own profound agony. He lifted his head slightly, the movement slow and deliberate, as if each muscle protested the effort, his eyes, clouded with pain and exhaustion, gazing not at his friends, but into the flickering heart of the small fire, where embers pulsed with a faint, dying light, mirroring perhaps the last vestiges of hope within him. The desert night had deepened around them, bringing with it a chill that seeped into bones, a stark contrast to the scorching heat of the day, and a thin, crescent moon, barely visible through a haze of dust, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the firelight, making the familiar landscape seem alien and vast. He began to speak, his words carefully chosen, each one carrying the immense burden of his suffering, a quiet defiance against the pronouncements of his friends, who sat hunched, their cloaks drawn tightly around them, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and a rigid, unyielding conviction. "Indeed, I know that it is so," Job began, his voice barely above a whisper, yet resonating with a deep, weary wisdom that seemed to have been forged in the crucible of his trials. He acknowledged the truth of their theological framework, the ancient understanding of God's power and justice that permeated their world, a framework passed down through generations, woven into the very fabric of their nomadic existence, whispered around countless campfires under the vast, star-strewn canopy of the Arabian sky. He understood, as they did, the immense, unchallengeable might of the Creator, the one who stretched out the heavens like a tent cloth, who walked on the waves of the sea, whose power was manifest in every thunderclap that echoed across the wadis and every flash of lightning that illuminated the distant mountain peaks. He knew that God was indeed great, immeasurably powerful, and that no one could contend with him, no one could question his actions without being utterly overwhelmed, like a tiny desert insect against a raging sandstorm. He spoke of God's mastery over the cosmic order, describing how the Creator alone could move mountains without them knowing it, how he could overturn them in his anger, a raw, untamed power that humbled all of creation. He painted a picture of a God who shook the earth from its place, making its pillars tremble, a vivid image drawn from the ancient understanding of the world, where the earth was thought to rest upon colossal foundations, a concept common in the Near East, reflecting the awe and mystery surrounding geological phenomena like earthquakes, which could devastate entire settlements and reshape the landscape in an instant. The very ground beneath them, the hard-packed desert floor, felt solid and eternal, yet Job reminded them, and himself, that even this seemingly immutable foundation was subject to the divine will, capable of being rent asunder at a mere command. He continued, his gaze still fixed on the dying embers, to describe God's command over the sun, how he could seal it off, preventing its light from rising, or how he could hide the stars, cloaking the night sky in an impenetrable darkness, a chilling thought for people whose lives were so intimately tied to the celestial cycles, for whom the sun's warmth was life and the stars were guides across endless desert expanses. The absence of light, especially in the vast, open desert, was not merely inconvenience but a profound disorientation, a loss of all bearings, a symbol of utter chaos and the terrifying unknown. He spoke of him alone stretching out the heavens, a phrase that evoked the image of a cosmic tent-maker, unfurling the vast, star-studded canvas above them, a testament to an artistry and power beyond human comprehension. He mentioned the constellations, the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south, familiar celestial markers that guided shepherds and caravanners alike across the trackless wastes, yet even these distant, seemingly eternal lights were but threads in the tapestry woven by the divine hand. These were not mere poetic flourishes for Job, they were deeply held beliefs, observations of the natural world that spoke of an unimaginable power, a power that could create and sustain, but also, terrifyingly, could unravel and destroy. Job then turned his thoughts to the more subtle, yet equally profound, ways God's power was manifest, speaking of the great things he did, things past finding out, and wonders without number. He acknowledged the incomprehensibility of God's ways, a truth that resonated deeply with the ancient mind, which often encountered phenomena beyond its immediate understanding and attributed them to divine action. The intricate patterns of a desert flower, the sudden, life-giving downpour after months of drought, the mysterious migration of birds across continents, all these were wonders, signs of a hidden hand at work, things that defied simple explanation and invited awe. He understood that God could pass by him unseen, could move through the world in ways that were imperceptible to human senses, a concept that added to the profound mystery and the sense of being utterly small in the face of such an omnipotent being. His voice grew a little stronger, though still imbued with a profound weariness, as he began to articulate his central dilemma, the core of his suffering that his friend seemed unable or unwilling to grasp. If he should snatch away, who could hinder him? He asked, a rhetorical question heavy with despair. He spoke of the utter futility of resisting such power, of the impossibility of demanding an account from the Almighty. He imagined himself trying to contend with God, picturing the scene in his mind's eye, a frail, suffering man, covered in sores, standing before the Creator of the universe. He knew that even if he were righteous, even if he were to wash his hands with lye and cleanse them with soap, symbols of ritual purity and blamelessness, God would still plunge him into the pit, making his own clothes abhor him. The very act of trying to prove his innocence, he felt would only highlight his utter inadequacy, his defilement in the face of absolute holiness. This was not a confession of guilt, but a profound statement about the disparity between man and God, a recognition that human righteousness, however diligently pursued, was utterly insignificant when measured against divine perfection. He continued to wrestle with this overwhelming disparity, his words painting a picture of a relentless, unyielding power. For he is not a man, as I am, that I might answer him, that we might come together in judgment, Job lamented, his voice tinged with a deep, aching loneliness. He longed for an arbiter, a mediator, someone who could lay a hand on both of them, bridging the infinite chasm between the suffering human and the incomprehensible divine. This desire for a go-between, a daysman as it was sometimes translated, was a poignant expression of his feeling of utter isolation, of being alone in his struggle against a power he could neither comprehend nor challenge. In the ancient Near Eastern legal systems, an arbiter played a crucial role in settling disputes, a neutral party whose wisdom and authority could bring resolution. Job, in his profound distress, yearned for such a figure, someone who could stand between him and God, to explain, to mediate, to bring understanding to his inexplicable suffering. But there was none. He spoke of God's relentless pursuit, how he crushed him with a tempest, multiplying his wounds without cause, a direct contradiction to his friend's insistence that suffering was always a direct consequence of sin. He felt like a reed buffeted by a storm, utterly helpless, utterly at the mercy of forces beyond his control. Even if he were to speak, to try and justify himself, his own mouth would condemn him, for how could mere human words stand against the divine decree? And if he were to declare himself blameless, God would prove him perverse, twisting his very innocence into a form of guilt. This was the terrifying paradox of his situation. His integrity, which he held onto so fiercely, seemed to be of no account in the face of God's inscrutable actions. A deep sigh escaped Job's lips, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of all his losses, all his unanswered questions, and all the pain that gnawed at his very being. He looked at his friends, their faces still shadowed by the flickering firelight, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and a quiet, almost pitying disapproval. He knew they couldn't understand that their carefully constructed theological frameworks, which had served them well in times of prosperity and predictable justice, were utterly inadequate to explain the chaos that had engulfed his life. He spoke of the futility of his efforts, the weariness that had settled deep into his bones. Though I am blameless, he reiterated, his voice firm despite its weakness, I do not know myself, I despise my life. This was a profound statement of his despair, a rejection not of God, but of the very existence that had become an unbearable burden. He was not confessing guilt, but expressing a profound sense of alienation from his own identity, from the man he once was, the man who had been blessed and upright. He then shifted his focus, broadening his lament to encompass the wider human condition, the universal experience of suffering and the seeming indifference of the divine. It is all one, therefore I say, he destroys the blameless and the wicked, Job declared, a shocking statement to his friends, whose entire worldview rested on the principle of divine retribution. This was a direct challenge to their carefully ordered universe, a universe where good was rewarded and evil punished, where cause and effect were always clear. Job, in his raw honesty, was saying that he saw no such clear distinction in the world around him, that suffering seemed to fall indiscriminately, like the desert rain that nourished both the righteous man's field and the barren waste. He spoke of the swiftness of death, how it consumed all alike, how God laughed at the plight of the innocent, a stark and unsettling image that must have sent a shiver down the spines of his companions, accustomed as they were to a more benevolent, if strict, portrayal of the divine. He spoke of the earth being given into the hand of the wicked, of the faces of its judges being covered, a powerful indictment of the pervasive injustice he observed in the world. He saw corruption and oppression flourishing, while the righteous suffered, a reality that deeply troubled his sense of fairness and divine order. This was not merely a personal complaint, it was a profound theological crisis, a questioning of the very foundations of justice and morality in a world governed by an all-powerful God. The ancient Near East, with its often brutal political realities and social hierarchies, provided ample evidence of such injustice, where the powerful often exploited the weak with impunity, and justice was often bought or twisted. Job, in his suffering, was seeing this reality with new, painful clarity. His thoughts then turned to the fleeting nature of human life, how his days were swifter than a runner, flying away, seeing no good. He compared his life to a swift boat, a papyrus skiff perhaps, gliding effortlessly across the water, or to an eagle swooping down on its prey, images of speed and transience that underscored the brevity and fragility of human existence. The desert winds, which could whip up a sandstorm in moments and then die down just as quickly, leaving no trace, seemed to mirror the ephemeral quality of life itself. He felt his time slipping away, his strength ebbing, and with it, any hope of understanding or resolution. He had hoped, for a moment, that if he could just forget his complaint, if he could just put on a cheerful countenance, his pain would somehow subside, but it was a futile hope. The pain, the deep, gnawing agony, was too profound, too pervasive. He concluded this section of his lament with a desperate cry, a profound sense of hopelessness that was almost palpable in the cool night air. "For I know that you will not hold me innocent," he stated, a resigned acceptance of his fate, a feeling that no matter what he did, no matter how he argued, God had already judged him, and that judgment was immutable. He felt trapped, caught in a divine snare from which there was no escape, no appeal. His words hung in the air, heavy and mournful, mingling with the scent of wood smoke and the faint, earthy smell of the desert. The silence that followed was even heavier than before, filled not with expectation, but with the profound weight of Job's despair, a despair that seemed to settle over the entire encampment, muffling even the distant sounds of the desert creatures. Then, as the first pale hints of dawn began to paint the eastern sky with soft hues of rose and lavender, softening the harsh outlines of the distant hills, Zophar the Naamathite, who had been listening with an increasingly agitated demeanor, could no longer contain himself. He shifted uncomfortably, his cloak rustling against the dry earth, and cleared his throat, a sharp, almost impatient sound that cut through the lingering quiet. Zophar was known for his bluntness, his lack of subtlety, and his words, when they came, were like stones thrown into a still pool, shattering the fragile peace that had momentarily settled. He was a man of firm convictions, deeply rooted in the traditional wisdom of his people, a wisdom that left little room for ambiguity or the kind of profound questioning that Job had just articulated. To Zophar, Job's words were not merely lamentations, they were blasphemy, an affront to the divine order, a direct challenge to the very fabric of their understanding of God's justice. His voice, when he finally spoke, was sharp and unyielding, a stark contrast to Job's weary murmur. Should a multitude of words go unanswered, he demanded, his tone implying that Job's lengthy lament was nothing more than empty rhetoric, a torrent of complaints that deserved a swift and decisive rebuttal. He accused Job of being a mocker, suggesting that his words were not born of genuine suffering but of arrogance and a desire to challenge God. "Should your babbling make men silent?" he continued, his voice rising slightly, betraying his irritation. He felt that Job's arguments, his questioning of divine justice, were not only unfounded but also dangerous, capable of leading others astray, of undermining the very foundations of their faith. Zophar's core argument, like that of his friends, rested on the absolute conviction that God's justice was perfect and always discernible. He believed that God knew all things, that he saw the hidden depths of the human heart, and that no sin, however secret, could escape his notice. Can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limits of the Almighty? He challenged Job, his words echoing the very questions Job himself had wrestled with, but with a vastly different intent. Zophar was not expressing awe at God's incomprehensibility, but using it as a weapon against Job, implying that Job's attempts to understand or question God's ways were presumptuous and futile. He asserted God's absolute sovereignty, his power to bring down the proud and to expose the wicked, a power that brooked no challenge, no questioning. He then launched into a series of rhetorical questions, each designed to highlight Job's perceived arrogance and ignorance. He spoke of God's wisdom being higher than the heavens, deeper than Sheol, longer than the earth, and broader than the sea, imagery that evoked the vastness and incomprehensibility of the divine intellect. These were not abstract concepts for Zophar, they were concrete realities, drawn from the observed world around them. The vast, endless stretch of the desert, the seemingly bottomless depths of a well, the boundless expanse of the distant sea, all these served as metaphors for God's infinite knowledge and power. He believed that God's judgment was always right, always just, even if humans, in their limited understanding, could not perceive it. Zophar then turned his attention directly to Job's supposed sin, though he never explicitly named it, preferring instead to speak in general terms, leaving the implication hanging heavy in the air. If he passes through, and shuts up, and gathers together, then who can hinder him? He asked, suggesting that God had indeed found fault with Job and had acted accordingly. He believed that God saw the wickedness of men, even the hidden sins, and that he would not overlook them. He urged Job to put away his iniquity, to stretch out his hands to God in repentance, to confess his secret sins, for only then, Zophar firmly believed, would restoration be possible. This was the traditional path, the prescribed remedy for suffering in their theological framework: confess, repent, and God would restore. He painted a vivid picture of the blessings that would follow repentance, a stark contrast to Job's current desolate state. Then you would lift up your face without blemish, you would be firm and would not fear, Zophar promised, his voice taking on a more hopeful, almost evangelical tone. He spoke of forgetting one's misery, of remembering it only as waters that have passed away, a comforting image of renewal and purification. He envisioned a future where Job's life would be brighter than the noonday, where darkness would be like the morning, a complete reversal of his current despair. He He spoke of security, of lying down with no one to make him afraid, of many seeking his favor, all these blessings flowing directly from a renewed relationship with God, a relationship forged through repentance and confession. Zophar's final words were a stark warning, a reminder of the fate of the wicked, a fate he implied would be Job's if he continued in his stubbornness. But the eyes of the wicked will fail, and they will have no refuge, and their hope will be to breathe their last, he concluded, his voice firm and unwavering. He believed that the wicked, those who refused to acknowledge their sin and repent, would find no escape, no relief from their suffering, their only hope being the release of death. This was a direct challenge to Job, a final, unyielding push for him to conform to their understanding, to admit his guilt and seek God's mercy. The desert wind, which had picked up slightly with the rising sun, rustled through the sparse vegetation, carrying Zophar's words across the small encampment, leaving a lingering sense of tension and unresolved conflict in its wake. Job, his body aching, his mind reeling from Zophar's harsh pronouncements, remained silent for a long moment, his gaze once again fixed on the distant horizon where the sun was now a fiery orb, beginning its relentless ascent into the cloudless sky. The heat of the day was already starting to build, a shimmering haze rising from the sand, promising another day of scorching sun and relentless discomfort. He felt a profound weariness, not just in his physical being, but in his spirit, a weariness born of the endless cycle of accusation and defense, of misunderstanding and unyielding conviction. He knew that his friends, in their own way, believed they were helping him, that they were offering him the only path to solace and restoration they knew. But their words, intended to heal, felt instead like salt rubbed into his open wounds, deepening his pain and exacerbating his sense of isolation. He finally stirred, a slow, deliberate movement, and a deep sigh escaped him, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of all the world's unanswered questions. His voice, when it came, was not angry or defensive, but infused with a profound sadness, a quiet resignation to the fact that he was utterly alone in his suffering, utterly misunderstood. "No doubt you are the people," Job began, his tone laced with a subtle, bitter irony, "and wisdom will die with you." This was a sharp retort, a cutting sarcasm that revealed the depth of his frustration with their unyielding certainty, their absolute conviction that they held all the answers, that their understanding of God's ways was the only true understanding. He felt that they had appointed themselves the sole custodians of wisdom, believing that without their pronouncements, truth itself would vanish from the earth. He then gently, almost mournfully, reminded them that he too possessed understanding, that he was not inferior to them in wisdom. "I have understanding as well as you, I am not inferior to you," he stated, his voice quiet but firm. He acknowledged that he knew the things they spoke of, the traditional wisdom about God's power and justice, the very tenets they had been repeating to him. He understood the ancient proverbs, the stories of divine retribution and reward that formed the bedrock of their culture, passed down from generation to generation around countless campfires and within the cool, shadowed interiors of their desert tents. He knew the theological arguments, the carefully constructed frameworks that sought to explain the world and God's place within it. But his own experience, the raw, undeniable reality of his suffering, had shattered those frameworks, revealing their inadequacy in the face of inexplicable pain. He then turned his gaze upon them, his eyes, though clouded with suffering, holding a piercing clarity. "Indeed, you are mockers, and you are worthless physicians, all of you," he declared, his words a direct and painful counter-accusation. He felt that their attempts to heal him, to offer comfort and counsel, were not only ineffective but actively harmful, like a physician who misdiagnoses a fatal illness or prescribes a remedy that only worsens the condition. Their words, instead of bringing solace, had only added to his torment, deepening his sense of injustice and isolation. He saw their pronouncements as empty, their wisdom as hollow, incapable of addressing the profound mystery of his suffering. Job then returned to his central dilemma, the incomprehensibility of God's actions and the apparent injustice of his own situation. He spoke of himself as one who was a laughingstock to his friends, though he had called upon God and expected an answer. He was a righteous man, a blameless man, yet he was scorned and derided, not only by his enemies but by those who claimed to be his friends. He felt like a lamp that was despised by those at ease, a symbol of light and guidance cast aside by those who felt secure in their prosperity, their lives untouched by the kind of profound calamity that had befallen him. He spoke of the tents of robbers prospering, and those who provoke God being secure, those who carry their God in their hand, a bitter observation of the apparent flourishing of the wicked in the world, a stark contrast to his own devastation. This was a profound challenge to the conventional wisdom that goodness always led to prosperity and wickedness to ruin. He then broadened his argument, appealing to the natural world itself as a witness to God's power, a power that was not always predictable or easily understood. "But ask the beasts, and they will teach you, and the birds of the air, and they will tell you," Job urged, his voice taking on a quiet, almost poetic quality. He spoke of the earth, how it would instruct them, and the fish of the sea, how they would declare God's handiwork. This was a profound statement, an invitation to look beyond human constructs and theological dogmas to the raw, untamed beauty and power of creation itself. The desert creatures, from the smallest insect scuttling across the sand to the majestic eagle soaring overhead, all bore witness to a creator whose power was absolute, whose ways were inscrutable. The intricate design of a desert flower, the sudden, life-giving downpour after months of drought, the mysterious migration of birds across continents, all these were wonders, signs of a hidden hand at work, things that defied simple explanation and invited awe. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? Job asked, a rhetorical question that underscored his belief in God's ultimate sovereignty over all creation. He acknowledged God's absolute power, his control over life and death, over the breath of every living thing and the spirit of all mankind. This was not a denial of God's power, but a deeper, more nuanced understanding of it, an understanding that transcended the simplistic cause and effect theology of his friends. He knew that God was indeed all-powerful, but that power was not always exercised in ways that were immediately comprehensible to human beings, nor did it always conform to human notions of justice. That is where we leave our story tonight. These moments of quiet are yours, you have earned them. If easy drift sleep has become part of your night, subscribing keeps us close. Sweet dreams and rest well.